Tonight's journey takes us to the Glade, during Thomas's first maze trial. In October 2009, readers first entered the Glade with Thomas, a boy who wakes inside a rising metal box with only his name intact. Around him, adolescent survivors maintain a small working settlement, while stone doors open each morning onto a maze that shifts before nightfall. At Delacorte Press in New York, James Dashner's dystopian novel The Maze Runner entered the world, carrying its readers towards a dark metal lift. You are Thomas, though the name reaches you slowly, like a word heard through deep water. Inside the box, the lift climbs through darkness, sealed on every side by cold metal walls that give back no reflection. Mechanical vibration passes through the floor and settles into your bones. The air is close, without wind, color, or any clear direction. You cannot see your hands or the ceiling. You cannot tell whether the space around you is narrow as a cupboard or broad enough to hold a small room. Only the motion tells you that the box is rising. The darkness has weight. It presses gently against your closed eyes while the cables above strain and hum through the metal frame. Somewhere beneath your shoes, the platform trembles. The sound continues upwards, slowly and without explanation. You try to recover your identity, but every thought returns without a beginning. There is no house waiting behind the darkness, no face attached to a familiar voice, and no street, classroom, or room that belongs to you. You search your mind for the shape of your family and find only blankness. You look inward for a birthday, a birthplace, or a language learned in childhood and meet the same smooth wall. The only certainty is the name Thomas. It lies alone in your mind, small and plain, separated from everything else. Thomas. You repeat it silently while the lift continues climbing. The word feels like a possession, though you do not know who gave it to you. You do not know how long you have been inside the box, or whether the darkness has lasted minutes, hours, or a lifetime. The enclosed walls remain close around you, each panel cold enough to hold the night. A faint metallic smell gathers in the air, mingling with oil, dust, and the dry scent of old machinery. Beneath your fingertips, the surface is ridged and slightly rough, marked by seams where one section has been joined to another. When the box shudders, your palm slips against the wall, and the vibration travels into your wrist. There is no breeze to disturb your hair, no warmth from the sun, and no distant weather pressing against the structure. The sealed chamber keeps its own climate. It gives you motion without distance and sound without a source. The machinery groans, pauses, and catches again. Each movement seems to lift the whole world by a fraction. In the darkness, the box becomes the only known place. Its metal corners, narrow floor, and steady upward pull form the boundaries of thought. You wait for memory to return, but waiting gives you nothing except the sound of the lift. The box rises through an unseen shaft, carrying you towards the Glade, though the name means nothing to you yet. You do not know that other boys are waiting above, or that 4 enormous stone walls surround the clearing. You do not know that those walls separate the grass and buildings from a maze beyond, where corridors change beneath the daylight. For now, the future is only the next vibration. Your knees bend with each sudden jolt, and your shoulder meets the wall whenever the platform lurches. You wonder whether the lift will stop, though even the idea of stopping feels uncertain. When the cables tighten and the machinery grows louder, your heart follows the rhythm. A thought appears, disappears, and returns without its source. Thomas. Your name is Thomas. Nothing else stays. The darkness preserves that single word. Above you, something shifts with a deep, distant movement that seems to pass through the shaft itself. The metal enclosure creaks under pressure. Dust sifts down from somewhere unseen and settles against your sleeve. For a moment, the lift tilts so slightly that you cannot tell whether the box has moved or your balance has failed. You reach towards another wall, finding a hard corner and a narrow strip of cold flooring. The darkness is complete enough to erase distance. You cannot tell whether your eyes are open. There is no window, lamp, or small line of light beneath a door. The mechanical vibration remains steady, patient, and impersonal. It travels through the box like a muted drum, while the sealed air grows warmer around your face. Then the machinery begins to slow. The change is gradual, almost gentle, but you feel it immediately through your feet. The vibration loses its sharpness. The cables above groan with a lower note, and the lift rises in smaller increments. Your body leans forward, then settles back as the platform makes its final ascent. Somewhere above, unseen mechanisms engage. A heavy lock moves with a sound like iron dragged across stone. You hold still because there is nowhere to go. The box stops. For one breath, the entire shaft becomes silent. Then a tremor passes beneath you, and the doors begin to open. At first, there is only a thin grey line. It widens slowly, spilling pale brightness across the metal floor. The light is so sudden that you turn your face away. After the long darkness, even this weak opening feels immense. The doors part further, and unfamiliar faces look down into the box. You see eyes, brows, noses, and mouths arranged above you in a circle of daylight. The boys lean over the opening, their expressions forming a shifting pattern of caution, curiosity, amusement, and concern. Their faces are unfamiliar, and none of them awakens a memory. Some are close enough for you to see dust on their cheeks. Others stand behind them, half hidden by shoulders and elbows. A voice calls down, asking who you are. Another answers with a laugh that is not entirely kind. The brightness behind them makes their features difficult to read, but their presence is undeniable. You are no longer alone with the metal walls. The box has brought you somewhere occupied, somewhere prepared for this arrival. You raise your head towards them, yet the names and meanings of these strangers remain beyond reach. A tall boy with light hair steps nearest to the edge. His face is open and watchful, and his posture carries the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. This is Albie, the recognized leader of the Gladers. Beside him stands Newt, whose calm manner and measured movements mark him as one of Albie's principal assistants. A younger boy pushes forward with less caution, his expression bright with interest. His name is Chuck. Behind the first row, a forceful older Glader named Gally watches you with narrowed eyes, already distrustful of what your arrival may mean. These names enter the morning together: Albie, Newt, Gally, and Chuck. They are the first people to surround you in the Glade. They are strangers, but the community has already assigned each of them a place. White daylight touches the rim of the box and turns the metal almost silver. You climb towards it, blinking against the brightness. The platform beneath you is flat, hard, and dark, but beyond its edge, you can see a square clearing enclosed by 4 enormous stone walls. The walls rise on every side, taller than any building you can remember, their surfaces grey and weathered beneath the open sky. Between them lies a wide area of dry grass, rough timber buildings, gardens, pens, paths, and work areas. Boys move through the clearing with the ease of people who have lived there for a long time. Some pause to watch you. Others continue carrying tools, baskets, or bundles of wood. The air is warmer and wider than the air inside the box, moving across your face with the smells of soil, livestock, smoke, and cut timber. You place one foot on the platform's edge, and then step into the glade. The dry grass bends beneath your shoes. It feels brittle and uneven, pressed flat in places by many passing feet. Small stones shift under your soles, while loose grains of dust gather around your shoes. The sunlight is white and almost painful after the sealed darkness. You lift one hand to shade your eyes, and the movement seems strangely slow, as if your body has not yet learned the scale of this open space. Around you, the Gladers form a loose ring. Their clothes are worn, practical, and stained by work. A shirt hangs from a line near one building. A wooden wheel leans against a wall. Somewhere nearby, an animal makes a low, restless sound. The open air should feel like freedom, yet the stone walls stand on every side, enclosing the clearing with patient strength. Albie tells you to breathe slowly and remain where you are. His voice is firm, but it does not carry anger. Newt adds that you have come up in the box, as every newcomer does, and that you will not remember anything except your name. The explanation seems impossible because it is delivered so plainly. You search your mind again. Thomas remains. Everything before Thomas is gone. Albie says the condition is ordinary here, though ordinary is a word you cannot trust. Newt uses another word, greeny, to describe a newly arrived person. The Gladers have their own vocabulary, customs, and ways of deciding what can be said. You hear those terms without understanding their boundaries. Gally mutters that the box has brought trouble. Chuck stays close enough to be seen, studying your face. The glade extends around you in rough, practical shapes. A low timber building stands near the eastern wall, its boards uneven and darkened by weather. Beyond it, narrow gardens hold rows of green plants between strips of dry soil. A fenced area contains livestock, and the animals shift against the wooden rails with soft, familiar noises. Tables, tools, buckets, and coils of rope occupy several work areas. The place has been arranged by repeated hands, not by an architect. Nothing appears finished, yet everything seems used. Doors hang from simple hinges. Roofs slope at different angles. Paths divide the grass wherever people have walked most often. In the distance, voices rise and fall over the ordinary tasks of morning. A hammer strikes wood. A board creaks. The glade breathes with work, even while every face remains turned towards you. You look from the buildings to the walls, and then beyond them, though nothing can be seen. The 4 stone barriers meet at distant corners, forming a square around the clearing. Their upper edges cut across the sky in long, unbroken lines. You cannot judge their age or purpose. Moss darkens some of the lower stones, while higher sections remain bare beneath the pale morning light. The walls separate the glade from the maze beyond, though the word means little until you see the enormous openings set into the stone. At each side, passages lead away from the clearing, framed by mechanisms and shadows. You understand enough to feel the shape of confinement. The glade is open above, but closed around its edges. The box was sealed below. Now the walls hold you in. Newt guides you away from the lift and towards a quieter part of the clearing. He explains that there is a place for you to sleep, though he does not yet tell you where you belong. The Gladers have made rules during their imprisonment, and those rules seem to exist in every movement around you. Boys carry messages without questioning them. Tools return to particular sheds. Meals appear at expected times. Work continues even when the maze doors open. You hear expressions that sound almost like ordinary speech, yet their meanings remain hidden from you. Greeny is one of them. Gladers is another. The names make the community seem established, although no part of it feels familiar. Albie speaks for the group. Newt translates Albie's authority into calmer instructions. Gally watches for weakness. Chuck follows with open curiosity. You are given temporary space among them, while the larger truth remains withheld. A light wind moves over the clearing. It passes through the dry grass in long, shallow waves, bending the pale stalks and leaving them upright again. The warmth feels clean against your face after the stale air of the box. Sunlight rests on the timber walls, revealing splinters, nail heads, and patches of old mud. A rope knocks softly against a post. Near the gardens, leaves tremble with a faint, papery sound. The livestock shift their weight, and the rails answer with small wooden complaints. Voices drift across the glade from different directions, sometimes clear, sometimes softened by distance. You hear laughter, a brief argument, and the steady rhythm of work. Above it all, the sky remains broad and colorless, while the enormous stone walls hold the square of daylight in their shadow. You ask where you are, but the answer arrives in fragments. Newt says the place is called the Glade. Albie says that you will understand more with time. Gally says that time has not helped everyone. Chuck offers his own explanation, speaking too quickly and stopping when Newt looks at him. The different voices leave you more confused than before. You do not understand why you were sent upward. who built the box, or who waits at the other end of the maze. You do not know why the Gladers are adolescent boys, or why none of them remembers the life that came before. Their confidence suggests a long history, but they protect that history with silence and unfinished sentences. You stand in the sunlight, surrounded by people who seem to know the rules of your imprisonment. The box remains open behind you. Its dark interior forms a rectangular absence at the center of the morning, still vibrating faintly as the machinery settles below. Compared with the warmth of the glade, the lift looks narrow and airless. Yet its sealed metal walls are clearer than the explanations given by Albie and Newt. The box is simple. It rises, opens, and leaves a person behind. The glade is more difficult. It contains gardens and livestock, work areas and sleeping places, voices and customs, but no visible road outward. The dry grass gathers around the platform, and sunlight falls across the doors. You can feel the difference between the two spaces in your breathing. Inside the box, there was only motion and confusion. Outside, there is light, sound, and a boundary. Chuck stays beside you as the others begin to disperse. He is younger than most of the boys nearby, with an eager manner that makes his attention feel less threatening than Gally's. He asks whether you remember anything at all. You tell him your name. Chuck repeats it carefully, as though making certain that it will remain attached to you. Thomas. He tells you that being a greenie is unpleasant at first, but that the feeling becomes easier. He speaks of other arrivals, other mornings, and the routine that begins once the box has gone down again. You cannot tell whether he is trying to comfort you or simply filling the silence. His closeness becomes a small point of steadiness. Among the unfamiliar faces, Chuck is the first person who seems willing to remain. At the edge of the clearing, a rough timber door swings in the wind. Its hinges complain in a slow, uneven rhythm, and the sound carries across the grass. Beyond the door, a narrow path leads between two low buildings, where shadows rest beneath the overhanging roofs. Bundles of herbs hang from a beam, drying in the pale warmth. A bucket catches a line of water from a wooden trough. Dust lies over the path in soft ridges, disturbed by footprints and wheel marks. The smell of damp earth comes from the gardens, while the livestock pens carry warmer, heavier scents. Here and there, small objects mark the daily life of the Gladers. A worn knife, a folded blanket, and a broken handle awaiting repair. Nothing is ornamental. Everything has a purpose, and every purpose has been learned inside the walls. Albie walks with you towards the center of the glade. He tells you that the community has survived by keeping to its customs. You must listen when instructions are given. You must learn the work. You must not wander into places you do not understand. Newt adds that the first day is confusing for everyone, and that memories do not return simply because they are demanded. Gally interrupts to say that some things are better left forgotten. His forceful voice cuts across the quieter conversation. Albie turns towards him with a look that ends the exchange. You sense the order of the group without being told its full structure. Albie is the recognized leader. Newt stands near him. Gally challenges from the edge. Chuck remains near your shoulder. The morning brightens gradually, though the walls keep long shadows over the grass. Those shadows lie in broad strips across the clearing, cool against your ankles whenever you pass through them. Sunlight reaches the upper stones first, then slips down their rough faces in pale bands. The grass near the center is warmer, while the corners remain dark and slightly damp. A bird calls from somewhere beyond the wall, its sound arriving without a visible shape. The Gladers' voices move around you like a changing current. One boy calls for a tool, another answers from a roof line, a third laughs near the livestock pens. Against these human sounds, the distant creak of timber seems almost musical. The glade is neither silent nor peaceful, but its noises are familiar to the people who made a life within it. You begin to understand that the clearing is both refuge and prison. The buildings offer shelter. The gardens offer food. The livestock provide milk, labor, or meat. Work areas give the boys tasks that divide the day into manageable pieces. Yet the four enormous walls remain, and the maze beyond them remains more powerful than anything within the glade. Every path turns back towards stone. Every explanation circles around what cannot be explained. The apparent refuge has been carefully bounded, perhaps for safety, perhaps for punishment. You cannot decide which possibility is worse. The box brought you into the enclosure, but it did not bring you freedom. It placed you in a community that already knows how to endure confinement. The word greenie follows you through the clearing. Some boys use it with amusement. Others speak it as if it were a warning. You hear it near the gardens, beside the timber buildings, and at the edge of the open ground where the maze doors stand. It is a temporary name, given to a newly arrived person, before the community learns what he can do. The word settles over you more easily than Thomas, perhaps because it belongs to the Gladers. You are Thomas, but you are also the greenie. Albie and Newt seem to expect that distinction to matter. Gally appears to expect the worst. Chuck treats the word as a fact rather than an insult. The customs of the glade are already shaping the way others see you. The stone walls hold the sunlight with a dull, mineral warmth. If you place your hand against them, the surface is rough beneath your palm, with shallow cracks running between the blocks. Some stones carry marks left by weather, tools, or years of passing hands. The wall does not move. It does not answer. It rises beyond the height of the timber roofs, making the clearing seem small despite its open sky. At its base, weeds grow in narrow seams where dust has collected. Tiny insects move through the grass, indifferent to the boys and the box. From the nearest passage into the maze comes a cooler current of air. It smells less like soil and more like stone. You turn away before the darkness beyond the opening becomes too inviting. Newt shows you the place where you will sleep. It is not permanent, because little in the glade is permanent for a greenie. A simple shelter stands beneath a roof of weathered boards, with a narrow bed, a folded blanket, and space for your few belongings. You have almost nothing to put there. The emptiness makes the room feel prepared for you, and unknown to you at the same time. Newt says that you will learn the names of the buildings, work areas, and boys who live around them. He does not tell you how long learning will take. Albie is called away by another glader before he can explain more. Gally remains outside, silent now, his suspicion as solid as the walls. Inside the shelter, the air is cooler than the open clearing. Dust lies along the window ledge, and a thin line of daylight rests across the floorboards. The timber smells dry and resinous, with the faint trace of smoke caught in its grain. Somewhere outside, footsteps pass and fade. A bird lands briefly on the roof, making two light taps before lifting away. The blanket is coarse beneath your fingers, woven from fibers that have been washed many times. Beyond the doorway, the glade continues in fragments. A voice, a tool striking wood, the creak of a cartwheel, and the low call of an animal. These sounds reach you without explanation, but they give the shelter a place within the larger clearing. The sealed box has vanished below. The glade remains around you. You sit on the edge of the bed and hold your name in the darkness behind your eyes. Thomas. The word is still the only part of your former life that has survived the journey. You try to attach it to a face, room, or voice, but each attempt dissolves before becoming clear. Albie's explanation remains near you. Every newcomer arrives without his memories. Newt's calmer version offers no more comfort. Gally's distrust suggests that memory may not be the only danger. Chuck's voice is easier to recall, bright and close, repeating your name as if repetition could give it roots. Outside, the boys continue their work. Somewhere beyond the walls, the maze waits. You do not yet know what it contains. The light shifts across the floor. A cloud passes over the sun, and the narrow beam fades into softer grey. The timber boards seem darker. The sounds outside grow more distinct for a moment, then settle again as the weather moves onward. A breeze enters through the open doorway, carrying the smell of grass and warm stone. It touches your face and leaves. Near the wall, a loose strip of bark scrapes gently against a post. The garden leaves make a quiet, restless pattern. You remain still, listening to the glade arrange itself around you. The box had given you only enclosed metal, mechanical vibration, and confusion. Here there is space, but the space has limits. Here there is air, but the air belongs to a place that is not yours yet. Chuck appears in the doorway with a small wooden cup. He tells you that it contains water, then places it on the floor beside the bed. His manner is careful now, as though he has noticed how much remains hidden from you. He says that people will ask questions, but that you need not answer more than you can. He explains that the Gladers give newcomers time to settle. The larger truth, he says, is complicated. Before he can continue, someone calls his name from across the clearing. Chuck looks back, then returns his attention to you for one quiet moment. He says Thomas again. The name sounds less fragile than before. Then he leaves, and his footsteps move away over the boards. The cup holds a faint reflection of daylight. Its wooden rim is smooth from use, while the outside remains marked by shallow scratches. A drop of water clings to the edge and slowly travels down the grain. You can hear the movement of the clearing through the thin walls. Voices rise and fall. Timber creaks under changing weight. Somewhere close, a broom brushes dust from a floor in long, even strokes. The sounds do not demand anything from you. They simply continue. Warm air moves through the shelter, and the smell of dry grass remains on your shoes. Beyond the doorway, the white morning has softened into gentler light. The stone walls are still present. The maze is still beyond them, yet the first sharpness of arrival has begun to fade. Later, when you return to the clearing, the Gladers have resumed their ordinary rhythm. Albie stands near the center, speaking with Newt over a list of tasks. Gally crosses the grass with heavy steps, looking back once before disappearing between two buildings. Chuck sits near the edge of the gardens, waiting until he sees you. None of them tells you why the box chose this day, who sent you upward, or what has been removed from your mind. They offer only a temporary place, a name, a cup of water, and the expectation that you will begin learning. You stand beneath the open sky, still unable to understand the glade or the reason for your confinement. The walls remain close. The daylight remains broad. The afternoon air lies warmly over the grass. The timber buildings give off the scent of sun-heated boards. Garden leaves cast small shadows on the soil. A goat shifts in its enclosure, and the fence creaks softly beneath its weight. From the work areas comes the measured sound of hammering, followed by a pause and the drag of wood across earth. The boys' voices become less curious as the hours pass. Some glance towards you and then return to their tasks. Others move around you as if the glade has already begun to make room. The stones along the walls grow pale beneath the lowering sun. Their shadows lengthen. The open air remains gentle against your skin, carrying no answer. Thomas. The name rests quietly inside you. The box has taken you from darkness into light, from sealed metal into the dry grass of the glade. Albie has named the order of the community. Newt has softened its rules. Gally has placed suspicion at your side. Chuck has offered the first small thread of companionship. Around you, rough buildings, gardens, livestock, and work areas continue beneath four enormous walls. Beyond those walls, the maze waits in silence. You do not understand it yet, or the place beneath your feet. You only know that you have arrived and that the Gladers have seen you. The evening comes slowly. Light settles on the upper stones and drains from the lower grass. The air cools against your hands. The timber buildings darken at their edges. A door closes somewhere nearby. Another opens. The livestock grow quieter. Voices become fewer and softer, gathering inside the shelters. Across the clearing, the box platform stands empty, its metal surface holding the last pale reflection of the sky. Its doors are shut now. Its vibration has ended. The memory of its movement remains in your body, a faint upward pull that will not yet leave you. You sit beneath the shelter roof while the glade breathes around you. The grass is still. The walls are grey. The air moves lightly. You hear timber settling in the cooling evening, and somewhere far off, a single voice calls the name Thomas. Newt waits until the last pale reflection has faded from the metal platform, then rises beneath the shelter roof and gestures for you to follow. He does not hurry, although the others have already begun to scatter towards their evening tasks. The glade lies open before you, divided into familiar paths, rough gardens, timber buildings, animal pens, and patches of trampled grass. Nothing about it appears accidental. Each corner bears evidence of repeated work, and every movement around you seems guided by habits formed long before your arrival. Newt walks beside you with his hands in his pockets, naming each place in a mild voice. The homestead stands ahead, broad and weathered, serving as the principal communal building. Beyond it, the builders repair a wall. Near the pens, the slicers prepare food. Somewhere close by, the med-jack tends an injured boy. You listen carefully, because every name feels like another piece of the world. The path beneath your shoes has been pressed hard by many feet, and the earth gives only slightly as you cross it. Wooden floors show the same history indoors, their boards worn smooth where generations of boys have passed carrying baskets, tools, blankets, and buckets. From the builder's area comes a patient sequence of hammering, each strike separated by the brief scrape of wood being shifted into place. The sound travels clearly beneath the tall walls before softening beneath the branches. Soil gives off a dark, damp fragrance beside the garden beds, where leaves rest in thick green clusters. You catch the sharper scent of freshly cut vegetables, mingled with straw leather, and the warm odor of the animal pens. Above everything, the stone walls hold the last warmth of the day, while their upper edges gather a cool shadow that slowly descends across the glade. Newt points towards the gardens and explains that farming is necessary because the gladers cannot live on whatever grows wild. The gardeners raise vegetables, tend the soil, and protect the small stores that remain after each harvest. Cooking is another occupation, carried out near the homestead by boys who know how to stretch limited supplies across many mouths. Building is equally important, because roofs leak, doors loosen, fences break, and the settlement must remain sound through every season. The med-jack tends the sick and injured, watching over wounds, fevers, and the occasional consequence of careless work. The slicers deal with animals and food preparation, moving between the pens, chopping tables, and fires. Defense belongs to those who guard the glade and watch the maze. Every necessary labor has been divided among the boys, Newt says, because no single person can carry the settlement alone. You see daily work continuing, although nobody knows the route home. The evening air has begun to cool along the ground, and the grass brushes softly against your legs wherever the path narrows. Thin stalks bend beneath the weight of dew, though night has not fully arrived. Near the gardens, dark soil clings to the edges of wooden tools, and a shallow channel carries water between rows of vegetables. You hear the wet rustle of leaves when someone reaches into a bed, followed by the quiet knock of a basket being set down. From the pens comes a muted stirring, hooves shifting over straw as the animals settle for the night. The smell of crushed stems rises whenever a foot strays from the path. In the homestead, voices pass through open windows, blurred into a gentle murmur without a clear beginning or end. Cool shadow from the high walls stretches across the nearer grass, covering the roots of the trees before reaching the center of the clearing. You ask Newt who decided which boy should perform each task, and he gives you a sideways glance before answering. The glade is self-governing, rather than directly supervised by anyone standing above it. The boys make rules, choose leaders, settle disputes, and assign work among themselves. The arrangement has not been handed down from ancient kings or preserved in a book of laws. It has grown from necessity, mistakes, arguments, and the long pressure of living in one enclosed place. The older boys understand what happens when nobody watches the animals, repairs the roofs, or records the stores. You ask who governs the people beyond the walls, and Newt says that nobody here knows. You ask why the box sends supplies, and he tells you that the Glade depends upon those deliveries. The answers are practical, but the questions remain larger than the settlement. A faint breeze moves across the open ground and carries different scents from one side of the glade to another. Near the homestead, smoke lies low above the roofline, touched with the fragrance of boiled roots and browned grain. Along the western path, freshly turned earth smells almost sweet beneath the evening dampness. At the animal pens, straw carries the dry warmth of bodies and old timber. The builder's corner smells of resin, dust, and split pine, while the medical room gives off cleaner traces of cloth, herbs, and boiled water. You pass over a threshold polished by many years of footsteps, and the boards feel almost silky beneath your soles. Every surface seems softened by use, though none of the objects around you is delicate. The glade is rough in appearance, yet its roughness has been shaped into order by countless ordinary acts. Newt leads you towards a low building beside the homestead and tells you that it is the Slammer. The name sounds casual, but the door is thick, and the small window has been barred from outside. The Slammer serves as a place of confinement when someone breaks an important rule or becomes dangerous to the others. You ask whether the rules are written anywhere, and Newt says that some are remembered, some are spoken, and some are simply understood. Their purpose matters more than their wording. Nobody is to steal from the stores, threaten the community, or enter the maze after sunset. Nobody is to endanger the settlement through foolishness. The rules have been shaped by a prolonged experiment that none of the Gladers can describe, and their usefulness is the only proof that has survived. You repeat the word experiment, but Newt has no explanation for who is conducting it. The narrow window of the Slammer reflects a strip of evening sky, turning its glass a dim bronze. Dust has collected in the corners of the frame, and a small spider has woven a delicate web beneath the sill. The door carries scratches where tools, boots, or restless hands have marked the wood. Nearby, a bench has been polished by years of waiting, its surface smooth and slightly warm from the day. The wall beside it feels cool when you pass your fingers across the timber. Beyond the building, a line of vegetables darkens beneath the failing light, and the first insects begin their slow movements among the leaves. Hammering continues from the builder's area, although the rhythm has grown slower. Each strike seems to travel through the ground before disappearing into the walls. Above the roofs, a single bird calls from somewhere hidden among the branches. At the homestead, Newt introduces you to the practical center of the community. Meals are shared there, meetings take place beneath its broad roof, and newcomers are brought inside when the day has become too confusing for the open air. Wooden tables fill much of the main room, their surfaces scarred by knives, cups, and years of hurried repairs. The boys have lived in the glade long enough to establish specialized occupations, even though many arrived without memories of their former lives. Newt explains that a person may change tasks when necessary, but certain names have become attached to particular kinds of work. The slicers know the animals and the preparation of food. The builders understand structures. The med-jack knows how to dress wounds. The runners carry a separate responsibility because they enter the maze each day to explore its passages. You ask how anyone can explore a place that changes, and once again the answer is that nobody truly knows. Inside the homestead, evening gathers in the high corners before reaching the floor. The air holds the layered smell of many meals, warm timber, damp clothing, and dust lifted by movement. You notice the polished boards beneath the tables, each plank dulled by countless crossings. Chair legs have left pale arcs in the floor, and the edges of the benches are rounded where hands have rested while people waited for food. A pot murmurs over a low fire, sending a thin thread of steam into the rafters. From outside comes the softened clang of a tool, the low call of someone near the pens, and the occasional creak of a wooden door. The homestead seems to absorb every sound without becoming silent. Its walls hold the evidence of shared living, while the last daylight enters through narrow windows and falls in long, fading shapes across the floor. You meet Gally near the rear of the homestead, where he examines a stack of timber with an expression that makes the air feel less welcoming. He looks at you as though your face contains an answer deliberately hidden from him. Gally has been in the glade long enough to distrust surprises, and your arrival through the box has disturbed the order he understands. He asks whether you remember anything else, and you tell him that you do not. The question returns in different forms, repeated by several boys throughout the evening. What do you know about the maze? What do you know about the box? What do you know about the people who send supplies? You have no useful answer for any of them. Gally's suspicion gives the rules a personal edge, because he believes uncertainty can become dangerous when it enters the community without warning. Newt steps between you and the argument, then continues the walk. Beyond the homestead, the ground rises slightly towards the stone walls, and the air becomes cooler where their shadow has settled. Moss grows in thin seams between the blocks, appearing almost black as daylight withdraws. The stones are too high to see over, and their upper edges remain distant against the sky. You place one hand against the nearest surface and feel rough grains beneath your palm, warmed in some places and cold in others. A faint smell of rain remains in the cracks, though no clouds have gathered overhead. The glade narrows visually as darkness gathers, with trees and buildings becoming separate shapes instead of connected details. At the far end, the maze openings stand like dark passages between immense sections of wall. Evening light lies across them in thin bands, narrowing gradually as the sun lowers beyond the stone. Newt stops beside one of the openings and tells you that the walls move. During the day, they stand apart, allowing the runners to enter the maze and return before night. At sunset, the great stone sections begin to close, sealing the glade from the passages beyond. Nobody in the settlement has found a permanent route through the maze, although the runners have mapped, remembered, and tested its changing corridors for years. You ask why they continue entering if the maze offers no certainty, and Newt says that finding a way out remains the only hope of reaching home. You ask what happens to anyone left outside, and his voice becomes quieter. A person who remains in the maze when the walls close is believed unlikely to survive. The grievers move there at night, and no one describes them with confidence. Their name is enough to make several nearby boys lower their voices. The stone beneath your hand has lost the heat of the afternoon, and dampness gathers in its narrow hollows. A thin wind passes through the opening, carrying the smell of dust, leaves, and something metallic that you cannot place. Beyond the threshold, the maze floor lies unevenly between walls covered with vines and pale marks. The passage appears empty, although shadows move across it as the light changes. From somewhere inside comes a distant scraping sound, too faint to identify and too regular to dismiss. Around you, the glade remains occupied by ordinary work, yet the opening seems to belong to another world. Evening light narrows towards the maze openings, leaving the nearest stones bright and the deeper corridors almost black. The contrast sharpens with every moment, as though the closing walls are already drawing a boundary between safety and danger. Thomas, you say, although the name feels unfamiliar in your own mouth. Newt tells you that the boys call you Thomas because that is the name you gave them, or perhaps the name the box brought with you. You ask why the box delivers a new boy at regular intervals, and he answers that this happened for a long time before the recent disruption. A new arrival would appear, confused and frightened, and the community would make space for him. Supplies would come through the box, and another person would follow after a measured interval. The pattern had been reliable enough to become part of the Glade structure. Then something changed. Newt does not say precisely when, because the arrival of the girl and the alteration in the box have unsettled everyone. You ask whether the people beyond the walls control the timing, and no one can tell you. The established community has many routines, but it cannot answer the questions that matter most. The platform stands quiet beneath the shelter, its metal surface now dark and dull. Fine grains of dust have gathered around the rails where the box rises and descends. The wood beneath the roof has cooled, and the joints make small sounds as the temperature falls. Nearby, a coil of rope lies beside a crate, its fibers rough and pale against the darker earth. You can smell old rain trapped in the boards, along with dry grass and the faint remains of smoke. The high walls hold back the wider night, giving the glade a sheltered stillness that feels almost complete. Somewhere beyond the gardens, a ladle touches the side of a pot. From the animal pens comes a slow shifting of straw. The noises remain ordinary, yet each one seems to exist within a boundary that might close at any time. You return with Newt towards the central clearing, where several boys have gathered for the evening meal. He explains the difference between ordinary gladers and the runners. Most boys work inside the settlement, protecting its routines and maintaining the things that keep everyone alive. The runners accept the danger of the maze because their task requires them to search beyond the walls. They leave in the morning, record what they can, and return before the passages become too dangerous. Their work demands memory, speed, endurance, and a willingness to enter a place that refuses to remain the same. You ask whether the runners know more than the others, and Newt says they know the maze better, but not the reason for it. You ask whether any runner has reached the outside world, and the answer is no. The glade continues, because some boys explore and others preserve the place to which they must return. The clearing has changed color beneath the deepening sky, becoming a broad field of blue-gray shadow. Lanterns have been hung beneath the homestead eaves, their small flames wavering whenever air moves through the doorway. Warm light catches on bowls, tools, and the edges of wooden benches. The grass carries the cool smell of evening, while the packed paths retain traces of dust beneath your feet. Across the settlement, the last builders put away their hammers, and the silence between each distant strike grows longer. Cooked vegetables give off a soft, earthy fragrance beside the serving tables. Someone carries a basket from the slicer's area, and the scent of straw follows him for several steps. The high stone walls have become dark, vertical shapes, with only a narrow rim of sky remaining above them. In that narrow space, the first stars appear without ceremony. You sit at a table in the homestead, while Newt continues explaining the customs that keep the glade from becoming disorderly. The boys eat together when possible, sleep according to the spaces available, and report injuries rather than hiding them. The medjack must know when someone is ill, because a small wound can become serious in an enclosed community. The builders inspect the walls, roofs, and doors. The slicers preserve food and care for the animals. The farmers watch the gardens. The defenders remain alert near the maze. Each occupation appears modest when considered alone, yet the settlement depends upon their combination. You ask who first named the jobs, and Newt says the names emerged over time. The rules developed in the same manner. They are practical responses to a prolonged experiment, not ancient laws whose origins have been carefully remembered. You repeat the phrase prolonged experiment, but it offers no person to blame and no door to open. The homestead floor is warm where the firelight reaches it and cool beneath the tables. Its boards shine faintly, polished by many feet crossing in every direction. A cup leaves a dark ring on the timber, and a knife rests beside a bowl filled with vegetables. Steam rises gently from the food, carrying the smell of roots, green leaves, grain, and a little salt. Voices move around you in low, overlapping currents, then settle whenever someone speaks near the center of the room. Through the open doorway, the glade appears in fragments of lantern light. One tree trunk is bright on one side and black on the other. A fence post casts a narrow line across the grass. The distant maze openings are no longer visible from this angle, yet their presence remains in the pauses between conversations. Outside, the walls stand closed, holding the night beyond them. Gally returns before the meal is finished, and the uneasiness in his manner makes you aware of every silence around the table. He asks whether you have been told the rules, then lists them himself. Stay out of the maze after sunset. Do not take what belongs to the community. Do not harm another glader without cause. Do not create panic when calm work is required. His words are firm, but the others listen because the rules have protected them before. You ask why the maze opens at all, since closing it at night suggests that its builders understood the danger. Gally says that the walls have always opened, and his answer reveals how little certainty lies beneath the phrase always. You ask who built the walls. He does not know. You ask why the box sends supplies. He does not know that either. Suspicion gathers around the unanswered questions, as if ignorance itself has become a person standing nearby. Night settles slowly over the glade, and the air beside the walls turns sharper than beneath the homestead roof. The trees hold small pockets of darkness, while lanterns make the paths appear shorter and more familiar. Wood creaks under the changing temperature, followed by the faint rattle of a loose shutter. The animal pens are quiet now, except for an occasional movement beneath the straw. Soil, vegetables, and old timber combine into a smell that belongs entirely to this enclosed place. Somewhere near the medical room, boiled cloth is lifted from a basin, releasing a clean mineral scent. The smooth floors inside the buildings retain the warmth of the day longer than the grass outside. Beyond the walls, nothing can be seen, but the darkness seems dense enough to possess weight. The glade offers shelter through its boundaries, and those same boundaries make the world beyond them feel more immense. When you leave the homestead, Newt points towards a small room where the med shack keeps supplies. A boy is being treated there for a cut received during building work, and the injury appears ordinary beneath the lamplight. Even so, Newt says that ordinary injuries must not be neglected. Medical care in the glade is organized because the community cannot easily replace the people it loses. You ask whether anyone has died there, and the room becomes quiet for a moment. Newt tells you that the rules were made partly from such losses, although he does not give every name. You ask whether the grievers caused them, and he says some boys did not return from the maze. The answer gives the word a physical shape. It is no longer merely a name attached to darkness, but a presence waiting beyond the closed walls. You understand why the gladers treat the maze as forbidden after sunset. A cool shadow lies across the path as the wall towers above you, though the moon has not yet reached its highest place. The stone surface is uneven beneath your fingertips, with shallow lines that have collected dust and moisture. The opening nearest you is sealed by enormous blocks fitted together so closely that only a dark seam remains. No light passes through it. The air around the seam seems still, as though the moving wind has stopped at the boundary. You hear a soft scrape from the other side, then nothing for several breaths. Far behind you, someone closes a wooden door, and its gentle thud travels through the quiet. A lantern flame trembles beside the homestead. The sound of distant footsteps crosses a polished floor. These small signs of ordinary life remain close, while the walls make the night outside inaccessible. You ask Newt how long the boys have lived this way, and he says long enough for the occupations to feel natural. Some gladers arrived when they were younger, while others remember boys who have since become workers, leaders, or names spoken only during quiet meals. The settlement has grown around repetition. A garden is planted because a garden was planted before. A roof is repaired because rain once entered through it. A runner marks a passage because another runner marked it earlier. You ask whether memory returns with time, but Newt says that it rarely does. The boys learn the glade without learning themselves. You ask whether the people outside intend to keep them there, and Newt answers that intention is another thing no one can prove. The community has made a life inside the experiment, though none of its members has agreed to the experiment's terms. The night air moves over the grass in slow, cool layers, and the warmth of the buildings becomes more noticeable whenever you step away from them. Lanterns shine through windows, turning the glass into small squares of amber. The gardens have become dark beds of leaves, and moisture gathers along the edges of the wooden borders. Animal breath clouds faintly in the colder air near the pens. Straw gives off a dry, sweet smell beneath the heavier scent of earth. From the builder's area comes one final movement of timber, followed by the soft placement of a tool on a bench. The homestead floor creaks beneath the returning boys, each board speaking briefly under familiar weight. Above the stone walls, stars fill the narrow sky, while the sealed maze remains without a visible horizon. Safety surrounds you, but it is made from stone, habit, and the fear of leaving. Newt walks you back towards the shelter where the empty box platform stands beneath the roof. He tells you that another arrival may come at the usual interval, although the recent change has made the old patterns uncertain. Before the disruption, a new boy generally appeared regularly, and the Gladers learned to expect the box even while dreading it. Supplies arrived through the box, along with tools, medicine, food, and the people added to the community. You ask whether the box can take you home, and Newt says that it has never carried anyone upward from the glade. You ask who built it, and he has no answer. You ask whether the doors can be opened from below, and he tells you that they cannot. The platform remains still beneath your feet, yet your body remembers its vibration. Its movement has become another mystery among many. Beneath the shelter, the air smells of cold metal, old wood, and grass dampened by night. The platform reflects the lantern light in broken patches, showing the roof beams and a blurred shape of your own face. Dust lies in the grooves beside the rails, undisturbed since the box descended. A small moth circles the nearest flame, casting a trembling shadow across the boards. The roof above you creaks once, then settles. Beyond the shelter, the glade has quietened into separate sounds. A low conversation by the homestead, a distant footstep, the faint shifting of an animal, and wind passing through the trees. The high walls remain dark and immovable. Their cool shadow has joined the general darkness, making it impossible to tell where stone ends and night begins. Somewhere behind the closed maze, the grievers are believed to be moving. You think of the runners leaving at dawn, carrying maps through passages that rearrange themselves around their memory. You think of the builders repairing a home they cannot leave, the farmers tending soil without knowing where the harvest will be eaten, and the med-shack treating wounds beneath a roof made secure by repeated labor. You think of the slicers working with animals and food, preserving the small abundance that keeps the Gladers alive. None of these tasks answers the central questions. The route home remains unknown, as do the reasons for the box's deliveries and the identity of whoever watches the walls. Yet the work continues because hunger, injury, weather, and darkness do not wait for understanding. The rules remain in place because ordinary necessity has tested them. The glade governs itself because waiting for outside supervision would leave the boys without protection. The last warmth has gone from the metal platform, and the shelter roof gathers the faintest sounds from above. A breeze passes over the boards, carrying the smell of wet stone from the walls. The grass beyond the shelter appears silver in the moonlight, while the gardens have become low, quiet shapes. Windows in the homestead still glow, though fewer now, and a thin line of smoke drifts above the roof before dissolving. The polished floors inside hold the day beneath their surface, remembering the passage of feet without making any sound. From the pens comes a soft rustle, followed by the patient breathing of sleeping animals. At the far edge of the glade, the stone walls stand complete around the settlement. Their openings have closed for the night, and evening light has vanished from the maze. Newt says that you will sleep in the homestead, where there is space near the others, and he begins walking back without waiting for another question. You follow him across the grass, passing the gardens, the slammer, and the darkened builder's area. The names settle into your mind with the weight of places visited more than once. The homestead, the slammer, the med shack, the slicers, the builders, the runners, the glade, the maze. Each word belongs to a system you did not choose, but each has already begun to organize your thoughts. You ask Newt whether the rules can be changed, and he says they can, although changing them requires more than wanting freedom. You ask whether the walls can be climbed, and he says many have tried. You ask whether the grievers can be fought, and he says some have fought them. None of those answers offers comfort. Still, the glade remains beneath your feet. A final lantern burns above the homestead doorway, its light falling across the worn threshold and the smooth boards within. The smell of cooked vegetables has faded into the quieter scent of ash, timber, and cooling food. Your footsteps make a subdued rhythm as you cross the floor, joining the sounds of other boys settling into their places. Blankets shift. A bench moves against the wall. Someone coughs once, then becomes still. Outside, the high stone walls hold the glade in their silent enclosure, and no route through the maze can be seen from the room. The night is cooler now, touching your face whenever the door opens. Under the roof, warmth gathers around the sleeping forms. Beyond the walls, darkness waits with the grievers and the passages that cannot be trusted. Between those conditions, the rules keep their quiet shape. You lie down among the gladers while the settlement continues breathing around you. At first light, the glade stirs beneath the pale sky, and you hear measured footsteps crossing the grass before anyone speaks. Minho is already awake beside the eastern passage, tightening the straps of his pack while the stone doors stand open to the morning. You stand near the threshold with the other gladers, watching him check a water flask, a short blade, and several folded sheets of paper. His face is quiet and concentrated, carrying the tiredness of many journeys through corridors that refuse to remain familiar. Around you, the settlement gathers in its ordinary places, yet the open entrance gives the morning a narrow and uneasy purpose. The maze is not entered for adventure or curiosity, but because the runners must search for an escape route during daylight. Minho lifts his eyes towards the brightening walls, and you understand that his daily work begins before the sun has fully warmed the stones. Each runner is given only a limited period for exploration, because the walls close again when the afternoon light begins to fade. They must travel out, remember what they find, draw their maps, and return before the passages seal the glade away. You hear the faint scrape of pencil against rough paper as Minho marks a final line, then folds the map with deliberate care. The page is not a disposable sketch, but part of a growing record kept by the runners and compared with older pages. Somewhere beyond the entrance, high stone corridors wait beneath the open sky, crowded with repeated junctions and turns that appear almost identical. A runner's life depends upon memory, speed, landmarks, and written records, with each form of knowledge supporting the others. Minho tells you that the walls move after nightfall, and his voice remains even while the warning settles heavily through the gathered crowd. A route that seems open at noon may become a sealed passage before evening, leaving a traveler separated from the glade. The work is dangerous because the maze changes after nightfall, when familiar arrangements become uncertain beneath darkness and mechanical movement. You look into the entrance, where sunlight reaches across the floor and rests upon old scratches left by many returning feet. Dust lies in the corners, soft as flour, while the taller stones above you hold a faint warmth from the rising sun. The air smells of dry earth, crushed grass, and leather straps carried by men who have run until their clothing darkened. Pencil lines cross rough paper in thin, patient patterns, sometimes fading where a thumb has rubbed against the page. Near your boots, the grass bends beneath the passage of the runners, and its dampness cools the edges of the path. Far inside, footsteps echo between the stone corridors, arriving as brief hollow taps that seem to belong to another morning entirely. A small bird settles upon the wall, then flies away when grinding hinges begin to move within the entrance mechanism. You hear the deep grinding of closing walls only in memory at first, though the sound seems present beneath every quieter noise. The stone surfaces remain cold in their shaded recesses, and the warmth of the glade ends suddenly at the threshold. Minho places the map in an inner pocket, protected from sweat and rain, because every mark may matter when the pages are compared. You see other runners assembling near him, each carrying paper, charcoal, water, and the particular stillness of people preparing to run. The maze has been divided into sections, and the runners explore those sections systematically rather than wandering without purpose. Each section has its own landmarks, difficult turns, and fragments of information waiting to be carried home. A tower of broken stone may serve as one marker, while a split wall or narrow shadow identifies another. The runners memorize these features while moving quickly, because stopping too long can waste the daylight needed for the return. Minho explains the daily race against the closing walls without drama, as though he were describing a tide with a very hard shore. You listen while he points towards the passages, naming sections whose arrangements remain only partly understood by the gladers. The maps are kept in a sheltered room, laid beside one another on tables, where old lines are studied against new discoveries. Thomas often stands near those tables, and you notice how his attention remains fixed upon the scattered pages long after the others have left. He studies the pencil lines crossing rough paper, following one corridor until it ends, then searching for another page that might continue it. The pages appear incomplete when seen separately, yet their repeated junctions suggest a structure hidden beneath the disorder. Thomas begins to sense that the maze may possess an underlying pattern, and the possibility grows quietly inside his thoughts. You watch him turn one sheet beneath the light, aligning a corner with another page whose edge has been softened by handling. The marks do not form a simple picture, but they contain regularities that resist the idea of complete randomness. A corridor repeated on 3 maps seems to bend towards the same central area, although no runner has yet traced the entire route. Thomas asks careful questions about dates, sections, and the order in which particular pages were drawn. The answers are rarely complete, because the gladers remember different details, and the maps have been altered by many hands. Still, the maps are compared rather than discarded, preserving the memory of paths that no longer look exactly the same. You smell old paper, lamp oil, and the faint mineral dust carried inside on every runner's clothing. The room is cooler than the outer yard, and the table feels rough beneath your fingertips where countless sheets have been spread. A pencil rolls slowly across the wood whenever someone brushes the table, making a small sound that seems unusually loud. Beyond the walls, wind moves across the upper stones, raising a thin whisper that drifts down into the map room. From the open entrance comes the rhythmic breathing of the runners, who return from their preparations with sweat already gathering. Dust clings to their boots and settles along their cuffs, giving their clothes the pale color of the corridors they have crossed. The stone passages absorb sound at certain angles, then return it suddenly, so that a single footstep may echo like several. Somewhere beneath the ground, hidden machinery answers with a low vibration, too distant to identify and too constant to ignore. The map room holds a quiet tension, because every line has been purchased with distance, exhaustion, and the risk of being trapped. Thomas touches a page without moving it, following a route that curves around a section marked by 3 small strokes. He sees similar marks elsewhere, and you feel the room change as an ordinary collection of sketches becomes a possible design. No one can yet prove that the maze has been built according to a plan, but the suspicion gives every old map a new weight. Minho returns from the morning run later than expected, and the expression on his face makes the Gladers stop speaking. He has found Albie in the maze, injured after an expedition they made together, and has carried the news back without him. Albie is the leader of the Gladers, and his absence at the edge of the maze creates an emergency no rule can easily contain. Minho says that Albie lies near a passage where the walls will soon begin to close. The words travel across the glade, passing from one person to another until every ordinary task has been abandoned. You see medics gather cloth and medicine, while others clear the entrance and stare towards the corridor beyond. Minho's account comes in short sections, each one bringing the danger nearer to the open doors. Albie has been stung by a griever and is unable to run, leaving him in a dangerous condition. The return journey has already become difficult because the maze is shifting towards its evening arrangement. Minho initially tries to return alone after finding Albie, believing that he can reach the glade before the entrance closes. He runs back through the corridors, but Albie's condition slows him, and the changing passages interrupt the route. You watch Minho disappear into the maze again, carrying no certainty that he can bring Albie out before the final opening vanishes. The afternoon light has lost its softness, and the walls cast long bars of shadow across the grass. Heat remains trapped in the stones, rising around you with the smell of dust and sun-warmed mortar. At the threshold, the ground feels hard beneath your feet, while loose grit shifts whenever someone moves too quickly. The wind has begun to dry the sweat on the runner's clothing, leaving salt along collars and sleeves. You hear distant calls from inside the maze, but the high stone corridors bend the sound until the words become unrecognizable. A pencil breaks somewhere in the map room, producing a sharp little crack that draws every head in the same direction. The deep grinding of closing walls begins beneath the other sounds, first as a tremor, then as a slow and deliberate roar. Dust slips from the upper ledges, drifting through the beams of light that still reach the entrance. The scent of crushed weeds rises where the Gladers have crossed the grass in their hurry to prepare for Albie. No one stands comfortably, because the remaining daylight has become a measure of distance rather than time. The stone doors are still open, yet their presence is already felt in the tension of every face around you. Thomas moves towards Minho before anyone can stop him, and you see that his decision has formed before he speaks. He has not been accepted as a runner, and the rules forbid him from entering the maze. The prohibition exists because the runners are trained, fast, and familiar with the sections they explore. Thomas has none of those protections, but Albie is still beyond the entrance, and Minho is struggling to bring him back alone. Minho tells Thomas to remain in the glade, yet Thomas looks towards the darkening corridors rather than towards those holding him back. Then he crosses the threshold, entering the maze before he has been accepted as a runner. The moment is so sudden that the watching Gladers seem unable to decide whether they have witnessed courage, foolishness, or disobedience. You follow Thomas with your eyes as he runs after Minho, his steps uneven at first upon the stone. The route ahead narrows between tall walls, and the glade falls behind him with its beds, fires, gardens, and familiar voices. Thomas reaches Minho near Albie, where the injured leader lies against the side of a passage beneath the fading light. Minho has tried to return alone, but the walls have shifted, and the route back now appears divided by a closing junction. You see him lift Albie, struggle under the weight, and glance towards Thomas with disbelief before allowing the younger boy to help. Together, they begin moving through the corridors, carrying Albie between them while the final sunlight retreats from the stones. The walls around you rise higher than any building in the glade, turning the sky into a narrow strip of pale blue. Their surfaces are uneven, marked by seams, shallow cracks, and dark stains that resemble old rain beneath the fading day. Dust gathers in the grooves of the floor, and every hurried step sends a soft powder around your ankles. Sweat cools along your neck as the run continues, while the dry taste of stone settles upon your tongue. Footsteps echo between the corridors, multiplying and returning from passages that seem to contain unseen runners. Albie breathes heavily between Thomas and Minho, his weight dragging at their shoulders whenever the floor slopes unevenly. The smell of iron comes from the blood upon his clothing, mingling with dust and the sharp scent of crushed plants. At each junction, Minho searches for landmarks, comparing broken stones and narrow gaps with memories stored from earlier runs. Thomas watches the corners, seams, and order of the openings, retaining details while he carries Albie through the dimness. The deep grinding of closing walls grows louder behind them, moving through the maze like a slow subterranean storm. A flock of birds rises from somewhere above the walls, their wings briefly visible against the last light. The corridors seem to contract as shadows lengthen, though the stones themselves remain motionless for several breaths. At a turning marked by a pale vertical scratch, Minho chooses the left passage, then stops when a distant door begins to move. Albie's hand slips from Thomas's shoulder, and the three boys sway together beneath the pressure of exhaustion and fear. Minho says that the glade is still beyond the next section, but the words carry little comfort, while the route continues changing. Thomas notices that the repeated junctions may not be arranged by accident, because certain turns appear at measured intervals across different sections. He remembers the maps, the pencil lines, and the scattered fragments that seemed unrelated when studied alone. The thought gives him a direction where Minho has only memory and instinct, although neither boy can yet explain the pattern. They move deeper into the maze as daylight fades, passing a wall whose upper edge glows briefly with the last amber light. The stone doors close behind them, leaving the two boys beyond the glade's protection with Albie's injured body between them. The sound travels through the ground, and the route back becomes sealed by slabs of stone heavier than any person could move. For the first time, Thomas spends the night outside the glade walls, contrary to the community's strongest rule. Minho knows what the darkness brings, and his anger is mixed with exhaustion as he searches for a place to protect Albie. Thomas remains beside him, breathing hard, his hands trembling from the long run and the knowledge that no safe return remains. They find a recess between two walls, narrow enough to limit the approaches and deep enough to conceal them from the open corridor. Albie lies on the ground, unconscious or barely aware, while Minho tears cloth into strips and binds the worst of his wounds. The night air enters gradually, carrying a cooler scent of damp stone and distant vegetation from beyond the maze. Light drains from the sky until the corridors become shapes rather than surfaces, and the landmarks lose their helpful detail. Thomas keeps one hand upon the wall, feeling its roughness and using the texture to orient himself in the darkness. Minho whispers the names of sections, repeating them as though the words might preserve the daytime map inside his mind. The corridors hold their breath between movements, and each pause makes the next sound seem closer than it should be. A faint mechanical pulse begins somewhere beyond the junction, followed by the dragging scrape associated with the grievers. Their buzzing and clicking carry through the stone, softened by distance and hidden passages. Minho's breathing becomes quiet, and Thomas lowers himself beside Albie while darkness settles over their clothes. Occasionally, something shifts far away, causing dust to fall from a ledge and scatter across the floor like fine ash. The stone beneath your knees is cold, yet the air around your face remains warm from the day trapped in the walls. A thread of moonlight appears above the corridor, thin and silver, then disappears when clouds pass over the unseen sky. The smell of sweat grows stronger inside the recess, mixed with leather, blood, and the mineral dampness of the maze. Thomas hears every small movement, from Albie's shallow breath to the soft scrape of Minho adjusting his position. Far beyond them, a griever produces a low electronic whine that rises and fades without revealing its distance. The sound of closing walls has ended, but its memory remains in the stone, which seems to hold a faint after-vibration. Hours pass without a clear division, and the darkness makes the night feel like one continuous chamber. Thomas does not sleep for long, because each unfamiliar noise brings his mind back to the danger surrounding Albie. Minho tries to remain alert, though fatigue bends his head forward whenever the corridor falls quiet. Thomas studies the boundaries of their recess and notices that one wall meets another at an angle repeated elsewhere in the maze. He remembers the maps again, recognizing the possibility that the sections may turn according to a larger arrangement. Without paper or pencil, he begins constructing the pattern in memory, using the order of junctions as a sequence. The idea is fragile, but it gives his attention a task while mechanical sounds carry through the stone beyond them. A sudden vibration passes through the walls, followed by a distant shriek that ends abruptly behind several closed passages. Minho grips his blade, and Thomas keeps his body between Albie and the corridor opening until the sound recedes. Nothing enters their recess, though the silence afterwards feels more dangerous than the noise itself. Near dawn, a weak grey light returns to the upper edges of the maze, revealing the dust upon their clothes. Albie remains alive, and Minho begins preparing for movement before the walls have fully opened. The stone doors shift with another deep grinding, exposing narrow strips of morning beyond the corridors. Thomas sees that one passage has opened in a different place from where he expected, but the change follows the pattern he has imagined. Minho lifts Albie again, and Thomas takes part of his weight despite the pain in his arms and legs. They begin their return through the maze, moving more slowly than the runners normally would during a daylight expedition. You feel the morning cold upon your face as the corridors admit the first thin currents of air from the glade. The surfaces are dark with night damp, and water beads along certain cracks before falling in slow drops. Dust sticks to the sweat on Thomas's hands, making the skin feel rough and tight around his fingers. Their footsteps echo between the corridors, sometimes joined by the faint clink of Minho's equipment against his belt. Albie's breathing remains uneven, and each pause allows the distant rustle of leaves to enter from the newly opened sections. Sunlight reaches the upper walls first, turning their edges silver before touching the lower passages. A small patch of moss grows beside a broken stone, soft green against the grey surface and familiar from one of the maps. Thomas points towards it, and Minho realizes that the landmark belongs to a junction they had been unable to connect with another section. The maps in the glade have not shown the complete arrangement, but their scattered lines now appear to offer a route. Minho follows Thomas through 2 passages, then takes a third turn when the walls reveal a narrow opening between them. The return is still dangerous, because daylight offers only a limited period before the walls close once more. Every minute matters, and the 3 boys move with the careful urgency of people carrying a life through a narrowing door. Thomas relies upon memory, speed, landmarks, and written records that he has not created, but has studied with uncommon attention. Minho relies upon experience, recognizing the difference between a real opening and a temporary angle produced by moving stone. Together, their knowledge becomes more effective than either form alone, and Albie is carried steadily towards the glade. The sun climbs above the walls, filling the passages with hard white light that exposes every crack and uneven seam. Warm air rises from the stone, while cooler currents descend from shaded corridors and move across your face in shifting layers. Sweat and dust during a long run leave a dry film upon the skin, with salt gathering beneath the collar. The smell of bruised leaves follows the boys wherever their boots press against narrow strips of vegetation along the floor. Loose gravel clicks beneath their feet, then skips away into darkness when the ground breaks at the side of a junction. The high stone corridors create their own weather, holding warmth in one section and releasing cold from another. Water drips steadily somewhere beyond the next turn, keeping time more reliably than any clock within the glade. A thin pencil mark in Thomas's memory becomes as important as the broken pillar beside which Minho pauses. The sounds of the maze change with the morning, replacing night's distant machinery with birds, wind, and returning footsteps. Above them, clouds pass across the narrow sky, and the brightness shifts along the walls like a slow curtain. The route seems endless, yet its details are beginning to form a language that Thomas can read without understanding every word. At last, the glade appears between two high slabs of stone, green and bright, beyond the dust-colored passage. The sight changes Minho's posture, though he does not yet allow himself to relax while carrying Albie towards the opening. Gladers rush forward with blankets, water, and medicine, surrounding the three boys before the stone doors can begin their evening movement. Albie is taken from them, and his body disappears into the hands of those who have waited through the night. Thomas remains standing at the threshold, unable to separate the trembling in his legs from the machinery's vibration below. The Gladers look at him differently now, because he has entered forbidden ground, survived the night, and returned with Albie and Minho. His survival unsettles the established order more deeply than a simple act of bravery would have done. The rules were built upon the belief that no one could remain outside after sunset and still come back alive. Thomas has not disproved every danger, but he has shown that the strongest rule contains an exception. Minho is angry that Thomas endangered himself, yet his anger cannot erase the fact that Thomas helped carry Albie home. You see the runners gather around the maps later that day, placing fresh pages beside older records with unusual care. Thomas describes the turns he remembers, and Minho compares them with pencil lines drawn during many previous expeditions. A section thought to be separate appears to connect with another, while a repeated junction acquires a new position in the larger arrangement. The maps are no longer merely records of where the runners have been, but evidence of how the maze may have been designed. Each page preserves a portion of the structure, and every comparison reveals another relationship between corridors, sections, and closing walls. Thomas's fascination with the underlying pattern becomes shared by others, although some Gladers remain reluctant to believe that order can exist within such confusion. The paper rustles beneath careful hands, and pencil lines cross rough surfaces until the scattered pages begin to resemble pieces of one unfinished instrument. Outside, afternoon light stretches across the grass, touching the entrance where the boys returned from their night beyond the walls. The stone holds the day's heat, but the shaded passage remains cool and smells faintly of rain trapped in its seams. Dust settles slowly upon the threshold, covering the marks made by hurried boots and leaving the ground almost smooth again. From inside, the map room comes the soft scratch of pencil, interrupted by murmured names of sections and landmarks. The glade breathes around you with renewed activity, though every sound carries a trace of what happened beyond its protection. A bucket moves across the yard, water ripples against its rim, and distant voices rise and fall beside the gardens. Minho's equipment rests against the wall, streaked with dust and sweat, while Albie's blood remains dark upon one torn strip of cloth. The sun lowers behind the stone, and the first cool air of evening passes over your face. Somewhere beyond the entrance, the deep grinding of closing walls begins again, sealing away corridors that now seem less unknowable than before. The maps lie beneath weighted stones, so that the evening wind cannot disturb their arrangement. Their pencil lines remain fragile, yet together they carry the possibility of a route, a system, and a purpose. In the days that follow, Thomas becomes more certain that the maze has an underlying pattern hidden within its daily changes. The maps become central evidence that the maze is designed rather than random, because their fragments align across repeated sections. You see the runners continue their work with greater attention, dividing the maze into sections and assigning each day's exploration carefully. Minho remains one of the most experienced runners, and his knowledge anchors the others when the corridors become difficult to distinguish. He remembers the position of a broken arch, the angle of a shadow, and the number of turns between two narrow passages. Thomas adds another kind of memory, one that searches for relationships extending beyond any single landmark. Together, they treat every map as something worth keeping, comparing, and preserving for the next journey. The danger remains unchanged, because the maze still closes after daylight and still contains grievers beyond the reach of ordinary courage. Yet the Gladers now possess more than fear and repetition, since their written records have begun to reveal intention. You stand once more near the entrance as morning gathers over the walls, hearing the runners prepare to leave. The high stone corridors wait beyond the open doors, divided into sections whose names pass quietly between the men. Minho checks his pencil, Thomas studies the folded pages, and Albie's absence from the threshold reminds you how narrow the margin of safety remains. A runner steps forward, and the others follow, carrying water, paper, and the patient discipline of people searching for a way through. Their footsteps echo between the stone corridors until the sound becomes part of the morning air. The maze receives them beneath its tall walls, keeping its repeated junctions and hidden arrangements beyond immediate sight. Behind them, the maps remain safe in the glade, their pencil lines crossing rough paper like threads gathered from many separate days. Ahead, the limited daylight begins to count down, though the sun has only just cleared the enclosing stone. Dust rises around their feet, sweat will soon darken their clothing, and distant mechanical sounds wait within the night. You remain between the open entrance and the quiet settlement, while the runners move into the corridors with memory and speed. The walls stand above you, unchanged for the moment, holding the morning in a narrow band of silver and gold. Somewhere ahead, Minho is already measuring the route, Thomas is searching for its hidden shape, and the maze is keeping its maps. The cold stone beneath your hands carries the night's stored chill, and its rough surface presses steadily against your palms. A pale wind passes through the opening, bringing the dry scent of dust, grass, and distant metal from beyond the corridors. Behind you, the glade is beginning its ordinary labor, with tools moving across wood and boots crossing the packed earth. Ahead, the maze waits in silence, its walls rising like cliffs whose edges have been cut into deliberate shadows. The metallic grind of moving masonry belongs to another hour, though the memory of it remains in the stone. For now, morning gives the runners a narrow permission, and every open passage seems to offer a route that may not exist again. The Gladers speak of the nighttime threat in subdued practice terms, as though danger has become another task within the daily order. The openings are accessible by day, they explain, and sealed by night, when the great walls slide together across the passages. No one describes this arrangement with drama, because the closing walls have been witnessed too often to require emphasis. At sunset, the maze becomes a different country, and the boundary between routine and danger is built from stone. The grievers patrol the corridors after dark, moving through passages that the runners can study only beneath the sun. Their presence makes the return to the glade a matter of timing, not courage, and every late footstep carries a quiet consequence. The words are repeated around the settlement by older boys who have memorized the pattern and younger ones who fear it. The grievers come at night, and the walls close at night, while the runners return before the last light leaves the upper stones. A low mechanical hum rises from somewhere beyond the corridors, too distant to locate and too steady to mistake for wind. Your fingers rest against a seam where two blocks meet, and the joint feels smooth from years of movement. Dust has gathered in the narrow line, although the stones themselves are fitted with an exactness that suggests patient construction. Above the wall, the sky remains blue, but the passage beneath it is already cool and shaded. A loose pebble turns beneath your boot and clicks once before disappearing into the grass. The settlement sounds close behind you, with murmuring voices, wooden boards, and the soft clatter of morning work. Yet the maze muffles these noises within a few steps, drawing the air into long corridors where each sound becomes smaller. Thomas watches the runners disappear and notices how quickly ordinary work gives way to preparation before sunset. In the morning, the gladers carry baskets, mend tools, cut vegetables, and attend to tasks that make the settlement habitable. As the light begins to decline, those same hands gather rope, water, torches, food, and the folded records of earlier journeys. The runners check their shoes, mark their pages, and speak in brief exchanges that leave no time for uncertainty. Every person in the glade understands the coming boundary, even when nobody names it directly. The maze is not a fixed landmark surrounding them, but a shifting part of the trial, rearranging its inner geography each evening. Its walls move with a metallic grind that can be felt through the ground before it is clearly heard. Torchlight trembles against the maze walls after sunset, and the passages measured by daylight become unfamiliar beneath the flames. The preparation is practical, almost domestic, yet it carries the weight of an approaching storm. The smell of cut grass lingers beside the sharper odor of oil from tools, while cooling air settles over the stones. Thomas stands near the entrance and sees the day narrowing around the gladers, minute by minute. The central doors remain open through the afternoon, their height making the people beneath them appear temporary and small. Minho and the other runners return with sweat darkening their shirts, their faces composed beneath the strain of distance. A boy takes their packs, another brings water, and someone carries the newest map toward the records where the patterns are stored. Nothing is hurried in appearance, although every movement has been arranged by necessity. The ordinary order of the glade continues beside the entrance, while the danger beyond it waits for the appointed hour. The closing walls create a daily boundary between routine and danger, and the boundary is physical enough to touch. You can feel a tremor beneath the soles of your feet when the first distant section begins to move. Stone slides against stone with a deep, metallic complaint, and the sound travels along the maze like a message. The corridor's brightness changes as one opening narrows, leaving a thinner column of sunlight between the towering blocks. A torch is tested near the settlement, its flame wavering in the evening air before being lowered again. Beyond the walls, the low mechanical hum grows more distinct, though the grievers remain unseen. The runners look towards the passage, not because they expect to see an enemy, but because they know what the darkness will permit. The last workers carry their tools inward, and the glade gathers itself behind the closing line. Ben is remembered in these quiet preparations, although his name is seldom spoken without the shadow of the changing. He was one of the gladers who underwent that severe condition after a griever's sting entered his body. Before the changing, Ben had been part of the familiar rhythm of the settlement, with a face recognized across the fields and corridors. Afterwards, his speech and movements seemed to contain fragments from a place no one else could reach. The condition was not simply an illness of the flesh, because it disturbed memory, identity, and the boundaries between past and present. A griever sting could bring fever, confusion, and pain, while the changing sometimes returned pieces of a victim's lost memory. Those pieces did not arrive as a clear history, but as sudden images, names, sounds, and impressions with no safe explanation. The Gladers learn to fear both the wound and the knowledge that might emerge from it. Around the med jacks, a medicinal smell clings to cloth, glass, and the wooden surfaces of the treatment room. The air carries disinfectant, bitter herbs, and the faint iron scent of blood beneath the cleaner odors. Bandages lie folded beside bowls, while small instruments catch the torchlight in narrow, trembling lines. Outside, the night wind moves along the walls, and the metallic grind of masonry continues at measured intervals. The room feels warmer than the corridors, though cold stone remains beneath the hands of anyone leaning against the wall. A lamp burns near the bed, casting a yellow circle over pale faces and damp hair. Within that circle, memory appears almost tangible, like a second body lying beneath the visible one. Albie also undergoes the changing after being injured by a griever, and his illness becomes another uncertain doorway into the past. His body lies weakened, while his mind returns to scenes that no one can safely interpret. The Gladers hear fragments from him, but the fragments refuse to form a stable account of the maze. A word may seem to name a person, then become a warning, then dissolve into feverish repetition. Albie's memories make the experiment feel closer, because they suggest that the settlement has been observed and arranged by unseen hands. The others cannot decide whether his words are evidence, delirium, or some mixture of both. Thomas listens from the edge of the room, sensing that the changing is not merely a wound's consequence. Rain begins somewhere beyond the glade, tapping lightly against leaves before reaching the stone in scattered drops. Moisture darkens the walls, turning their surfaces black in the torchlight and bringing out the thin lines between each block. The medicinal smell around the med jacks becomes stronger in the damp air, mixed with wet wool and smoke. A cloth is wrung into a basin, and the water trembles beneath the reflected flame. Farther away, the low mechanical hum remains constant, as though some hidden engine continues beneath the earth. The grievers are not visible, but their absence has a shape that everyone recognizes. It settles over the room whenever Albie murmurs, whenever the torches flicker, and whenever the walls move beyond the corridor. In the darkness, the maze seems less like a building than a living arrangement of pressure, silence, and restrained movement. Thomas receives a griever sting while trying to save his companions, and the wound changes the direction of his days. He enters the danger deliberately, moving towards the creatures when the others are threatened by the closing paths. The griever he encounters is neither wholly animal nor wholly machine, but a hybrid creature covered with biological and technological features. Its surface contains wet, living textures beside hard plates, wires, spines, and articulated parts that move with separate purposes. The creature's motion is heavy and rapid, combining the weight of machinery with the sudden changes of an insect or animal. A sting carries the danger of the changing, and Thomas understands this even before the pain has settled into his body. The others pull him away from the corridor, while the griever continues its patrol beyond the narrowing passage. His attempt to defend his companions has placed him among the injured, where memory and fever wait together. The stone beneath Thomas's shoulder is cold, despite the heat rising through his skin. Torchlight shakes across the walls as the Gladers carry him inward, making the corridor appear to breathe with every movement. The metallic grind of masonry comes from behind, followed by the heavy locking sound of the final entrance. A medicinal smell gathers around the med jacks, whose hands move carefully over the wound and the surrounding skin. Water is poured into a basin, and the surface trembles whenever a distant impact travels through the floor. Beyond the room, the grievers continue their night patrols, concealed by walls that have become sealed barriers. Thomas hears voices in broken pieces, then loses them beneath the pressure of heat, darkness, and returning images. The serum known as the grief serum is used in attempts to treat griever stings, though its success is uncertain. The dose is measured with care, because the medicine can restrain the body without making the mind's disturbance understandable. Around the med jacks, glass containers stand in rows, each one reflecting a small, distorted square of firelight. The serum carries a sharp medicinal odor, clean and bitter, settling in the throat as it is prepared. Albie has received it after his injury, and Thomas is given it while the changing begins its work. Neither treatment restores the past in a simple manner, and neither prevents memory from arriving in painful flashes. The grief serum becomes associated with both relief and uncertainty, a remedy that opens a door without showing the room beyond. Thomas lies still while the medicine enters him, and the walls continue their slow movement outside. The changing draws him through images that seem older than the glade and more deliberate than dreams. He sees corridors, instruments, lights, and people whose faces remain indistinct beneath the pressure of recollection. He senses that the maze creators are connected to his forgotten past, though the connection appears first as feeling rather than explanation. A voice seems to speak from within the memory, and the voice carries the cold precision of an experiment. Thomas cannot yet place the rooms, the symbols, or the purpose of the trial, but the images return with increasing order. The changing has not given him a complete answer, yet it has moved his past from emptiness towards a hidden shape. Under the torchlight, the walls outside resemble sheets of dark slate, wet at their lower edges. Small streams of rain run down the stone and gather in shallow grooves near the floor. The air has cooled, carrying the scent of mud, leaves, and the oily residue left by the moving mechanisms. Somewhere beyond the sealed corridors, metal touches metal with a slow, deliberate rhythm. The sound fades, returns, and fades again, leaving a broad silence between each distant movement. Inside the med jack's room, the lamp flame leans slightly whenever the door opens. A damp cloth rests across Thomas's forehead, and its weight seems almost heavy enough to anchor him to the present. The serum's bitterness remains in the air, mingling with smoke from the torches set along the corridor. Night gathers against the walls, while memory passes through Thomas in fragments as restless as rain. The runner's records begin to appear differently after Thomas's experience, because the walls no longer seem to shift without meaning. The movement is eventually understood as part of a readable pattern, although the pattern is obscured by fear and incomplete observation. The maps contain repeated outlines of the same sections, copied from journeys made on different days. They do not describe one single journey, because the runner's records cover repeated observations gathered across many returns. Each page preserves a route, a blockage, a turning point, and a relationship between corridors that may change by morning. The maze contains 8 main sections in the runner's mapping system, and each section receives careful attention. 8 sections form the working structure, though the walls within them continue to move and alter the available routes. The records slowly begin to resemble pieces of a cipher, with meaning emerging through comparison rather than through one discovery. Paper rustles softly beneath resting hands, and charcoal marks darken the table where the maps are assembled. A candle has burned low beside the records, giving the room a warm smell of wax and smoke. The wooden table bears scratches from compasses, knives, and repeated attempts to align the drawings. Cold stone surrounds the map room, pressing a mineral quiet into every pause between voices. From the corridor comes the subdued scrape of a torch being lifted against the wall. Its trembling light crosses the maps in narrow bands, briefly illuminating 8 sections before returning them to shadow. Thomas studies the records with the uneasy recognition that he has seen some of their shapes before. The discovery changes the nature of the enclosure, because a shifting wall is no longer only a barrier. Its position can carry information about the larger design, even when the meaning remains incomplete. A sealed opening may indicate a change in the sequence, while a newly accessible passage may complete a partial arrangement. The runner's maps preserve these variations like repeated lines in a long, unfinished sentence. Minho and Thomas examine the records together, comparing old markings with routes remembered from the most recent day. The 8 main sections become less like separate places and more like positions within a single mechanism. No one can yet read the whole message, but the possibility of meaning makes every stone more significant. The architecture of the maze therefore functions as both prison and message, enclosing the gladers while communicating with them. The corridors are built to restrict movement, yet their alterations reveal that restriction itself has been organized. A wall that closes at night hides the threat of the grievers, while a wall that shifts by day conceals a pattern. The prison has rules, and the message is written through those rules in masonry, distance, and time. The gladers have lived inside this arrangement long enough to obey it before understanding it. They return before sunset because survival requires routine, even while the routine prevents them from seeing the full design. Wind brushes the upper stones and finds its way through narrow spaces above the sealed entrances. The walls hold the dampness of the night, and their surfaces feel colder where rain has reached the joints. The glow of the torches touches lichen, scratches, and the pale edges of marks left by earlier runners. A low mechanical hum continues beyond the corridors, sometimes joined by a distant scrape that may belong to a griever. The air tastes of wet dust and smoke, while the ground retains the faint vibration of moving stone. In the glade, sleeping forms lie beneath blankets, and the settlement's fires have settled into red coals. The boundary between routine and danger remains closed until morning, but the message inside the walls continues to rearrange itself. Thomas's memories connect him to the creators of the maze, although the connection does not immediately explain his role. He remembers the experiment through flashes of language, rooms, and decisions that seem to have been made before his arrival. The people behind the trial appear not as distant legends, but as figures linked to his own forgotten consciousness. This knowledge makes the maze more personal and more difficult to endure. The walls were designed by minds that knew the gladers would search for meaning, and the changing pattern may have been intended for him. Ben's changing and Albie's changing now seem part of the same larger uncertainty, where injury becomes a passage into hidden knowledge. Thomas's sting has brought him closer to memories that the others received only as broken disturbances. The grief serum steadies his body, but the returned fragments continue to press against the limits of what he can bear. A pale moon lies across the wet stones, and each block casts a long, soft-edged shadow. Water drips from an unseen ledge, marking the darkness at regular intervals. The cold stone beneath your hands is almost smooth in places, polished by time and by the touch of many anxious palms. Near the med shacks, the medicinal smell has faded into the general odor of damp cloth and banked fire. The metallic machinery rests for a while, leaving a silence that seems deeper because movement has recently filled it. Far beyond the glade, some living or mechanical thing shifts among the corridors. The sound is brief, followed by another stillness in which the walls seem to listen. By dawn, the openings will become accessible again, and the daily division between work and danger will be restored. Until then, the maze keeps its secrets beneath stone, metal, rain, and the slow breathing of the sleeping settlement. The next morning, the runners enter the corridors with records folded against their bodies and the changing pattern held in memory. They no longer look only for a path from one place to another. They search for relationships among the 8 sections, watching how each wall moves in relation to the others. The maps are compared across repeated observations, because a single journey can show direction but cannot reveal the design. Every return adds another line to the cipher, even when the line appears to contradict what came before. Thomas walks beside the records with memories that do not belong entirely to the life he can recall. The maze remains a prison, the grievers remain a nighttime threat, and the walls remain parts of a trial that has not ended. Yet beneath those facts lies another structure, waiting in the movements of stone. The corridors brighten slowly, and the first opening begins to widen with a deep mechanical grind. Sunlight enters across the floor, touching the cold masonry and the damp tracks left by the rain. Dust lifts in the beam and turns gently, while the settlement behind you resumes its familiar sounds. The air carries wood smoke, grass, and the faint medicinal trace that remains around the med Jack's room. A runner's pencil scratches across paper, recording the time and position of a wall that has just moved. The maze opens by degrees, revealing a route that has been closed since the previous evening. Morning has returned, but the pattern inside the stone has not finished speaking. The alarm rings across the glade before the morning has properly settled, startling the birds from the eastern wall and drawing every boy towards the box. You are standing near the stone passage when the sound begins, a harsh metallic summons that trembles through the grass beneath your shoes. Its note rises and falls against the towering walls, while the familiar clatter of breakfast fades into an uneasy silence. Someone shouts that the box has returned, although its arrival is not expected until later in the day. The lift is coming upward early, and the cables groan beneath the strain of their sudden movement. Around you, the gladers gather along the platform, pale faces turning towards the dark opening where the mechanism has begun to climb. Dust shakes loose from the shaft, drifting through the thin morning brightness like grey ash. The iron doors judder against their guides, stopping once, then moving again with a weight that seems almost reluctant. Thomas stands close to the edge, his body still carrying the exhaustion of his exceptional night in the maze. Only hours have passed since he returned from the stone corridors, carrying knowledge that has unsettled every rule the gladers trusted. Now the box rises beneath him, and the sound of its cables seems to answer something hidden in his mind. The platform reaches the surface with a heavy impact, and the doors remain shut for several quiet seconds. No one speaks during that pause, because the delay feels unlike the ordinary rhythm of every previous arrival. Then the metal panels part, revealing not another frightened boy, but a girl lying motionless beneath the cold light. She's the first girl to arrive in the glade, and her presence changes the shape of the morning before anyone understands why. Her body rests among the familiar supplies, dressed in clothing that resembles the garments worn by every other newcomer. One hand lies open beside her, while the other holds a small folded note against her chest. The words are visible before the paper is taken away, written in a firm hand that does not tremble. She is the last one, the message declares, and its meaning reaches the gladers before the sentence has been read aloud. For a moment, the boys simply stare, caught between curiosity and the discomfort of seeing the expected pattern broken. The box should have carried another male arrival, another blank face, another damaged fragment of a life removed from memory. Instead, Teresa has come upward in a condition resembling a coma, breathing faintly beneath the watch of the entire settlement. The alarm continues ringing above her, turning the stillness of her face into something almost ceremonial. Thomas looks at her, and recognition passes through him before history can offer a name. He does not remember Teresa in the ordinary sense, yet an emotion rises with such force that his expression becomes difficult to read. The feeling is not simple affection, nor is it the shock of seeing a stranger. It is closer to finding a familiar room inside a house whose doors and windows have all been removed. Around the platform, the boys begin to murmur, and the sound spreads in uneven currents through the crowd. Some argue that the note must be a trick, while others insist that the box has followed instructions written by people beyond the walls. Albie moves forward with authority, though even his authority appears thinner beside the girl's silent arrival. Newt watches the lift, the note, and Teresa's closed eyes, trying to place each detail within the old order. Thomas remains near her, pulled forward by something that ordinary memory cannot explain. The pale light rests across Teresa's still face, revealing the slight movement of her eyelids and the colorless curve of her lips. Dust has settled over the platform, softening the edges of the metal and dulling the bright corners of the machinery. The cables above continue to vibrate, sending a faint shudder through the framework whenever the lift shifts beneath its load. A cool draft rises from the shaft, carrying the smell of oil, iron, and earth sealed below the glade. The boys stand shoulder to shoulder around the opening, but none of them steps close enough to touch her. Their silence follows them outside the homestead, where Teresa is carried from the platform and placed beneath a clean blanket. The room smells faintly medicinal, with crushed herbs, boiled cloth, and the sharp trace of substances kept for wounds. Sunlight enters through the narrow windows, falling across her hands before withdrawing as clouds pass over the roof. Thomas feels the same pull from across the room, although he tries to remain beside the doorway with the other watchers. He has no ordinary memories of Teresa, no clear scene, no shared conversation, and no remembered journey that places them together. Still, her presence presses against the inside of his thoughts, where something shaped like her name waits in darkness. The Gladers argue softly about what her arrival means, their careful voices moving through the sick room like footsteps over frozen ground. A girl has never risen from the box before, and the change seems more serious than the difference between one face and another. The maze has always been cruel, but its cruelty has possessed a pattern, allowing the Gladers to pretend that rules exist. Teresa's arrival suggests that the rules are temporary, and perhaps deliberately disturbed by the people directing the experiment. Albie says the note must be examined before anyone decides what it means. Newt replies that the note may be the only clear instruction they have received in years. Minho remains restless near the bed, looking towards the doors, as though the maze itself might open inside the homestead. Thomas says little, because the strongest information is not spoken aloud. A sensation moves through him, a brief pressure behind his eyes, followed by a voice that carries no sound. Thomas, Teresa thinks, though the name reaches him with the intimacy of something spoken long ago. He turns towards the bed, but Teresa's eyes remain closed, and her breathing does not change. The message is not a sentence heard through the ears, but a thought placed inside his mind with astonishing precision. Thomas, Teresa sends again, and beneath the name he feels fear, urgency, and a memory of stone corridors filled with shifting light. The telepathic connection gives Thomas information that spoken conversation cannot provide, though it offers no complete explanation. He understands that she knows him, that she has expected him, and that both of them have lost more than either can remember. Her thoughts arrive in fragments, like pages separated from a book and carried through different rooms. He sees a flash of black stone, a pattern of lines, and a bright symbol resembling a code. He senses Teresa telling him that the maze is not merely a prison, but a structure arranged to be read. The thought vanishes before he can ask how she knows this. Outside, the glade grows warmer under the rising sun, while the homestead remains dim and cool around Teresa's bed. A curtain moves beside the window, lifting with each breath of air before falling gently against the wooden frame. The hush of boys gathered outside the homestead continues through the morning, interrupted only by murmured arguments and the scrape of boots. Inside the sick room, a basin of water cools beside the bed, reflecting a narrow strip of silver light. The faint medicinal odor lingers around Teresa, clinging to the sheets and mingling with the smell of old timber. Thomas stands near the threshold while the medjacks check her pulse, breathing, and skin temperature. Their hands move carefully because Teresa remains unconscious after reaching the glade, and offers no response to their questions. The boys cannot tell whether she is asleep, drugged, injured, or held somewhere beyond ordinary waking. The note says she is the last person who will arrive, yet her silence leaves the message surrounded by uncertainty. Some believe the statement means that the box will never rise again. Others wonder whether the last arrival signifies the beginning of something worse than the regular deliveries. Thomas listens to each theory, while Teresa's presence continues to pull his attention back towards the bed. He remembers nothing that could explain the feeling, but the absence of explanation does not weaken it. When he closes his eyes, he sees a girl running through corridors of stone, although he cannot decide whether the image belongs to memory or dream. Teresa's face appears within the vision, older and younger at the same time, illuminated by a light with no visible source. Her hand reaches towards him, and the maze walls turn white around them. He opens his eyes to find only the quiet room, the folded blanket, and the boy standing beside the medicine shelf. The vision suggests that Teresa possesses fragments of knowledge the Gladers lack, but it does not reveal whether she can be trusted. Her role remains ambiguous because she has arrived with a message, a connection, and an understanding of the maze that none of the others possesses. Thomas senses that the missing part of his past is not his alone. Whatever happened before the Glade, Teresa stood somewhere within the same hidden arrangement. The discovery frightens him more deeply than the arrival itself, because shared memory implies shared responsibility. The walls of the homestead hold the afternoon heat, and the wooden floor gives a soft creak beneath every shifting foot. Through the open doorway, you can hear distant voices crossing the courtyard and the occasional clank of tools from the gardens. A fly circles near the window, vanishing whenever the curtain rises into the light. Teresa remains motionless while the Gladers take turns watching her, each boy trying to discover meaning in the smallest movement. Her lashes cast faint shadows over her cheeks, and the pale illumination makes her seem separated from the ordinary life of the settlement. Thomas returns several times, although he cannot explain why he leaves the others and walks back towards the room. Each visit brings the same strange pressure behind his eyes, as though a locked door waits for him to touch its handle. He feels Teresa in the distance of his mind, not always speaking, but never entirely absent. At times, the connection carries a single impression, such as cold stone beneath bare hands or the sudden smell of rain. At other moments, he receives brief words that seem to have traveled across an immense distance. Maze, Teresa thinks, and then code, followed by an image of patterns turning slowly beneath a dark sky. Thomas asks what the words mean, but his question returns to him without an answer. He asks whether she remembers the Glade, and a wave of confusion passes through their shared silence. Then Teresa sends a thought that leaves him cold. They did this together. The phrase is incomplete, but Thomas understands that the people beyond the maze placed them inside the same experiment. The knowledge reaches him before any spoken conversation can occur, and he cannot decide whether it is a warning or an accusation. Outside, the Gladers begin to use a new word for the changes surrounding them. They call Teresa's arrival the beginning of the ending, although no one can say exactly what the ending will contain. The name travels through the settlement in quiet repetitions, spoken near the gardens, the sleeping quarters, and the stone passages. It becomes attached to the alarm, the note, Thomas's exceptional night in the maze, and the girl who has not yet opened her eyes. The alarm remains in everyone's memory, louder whenever the boys describe the morning again. The box has returned earlier than expected, and its early return feels like a deliberate interruption in the timetable. No one can explain why Teresa arrived immediately after Thomas's exceptional night in the maze. The sequence seems arranged, as if his discovery within the stone corridors had summoned her upward. Thomas hears the idea spoken by others, but he feels its shape already forming inside his own thoughts. Teresa's arrival follows his night, follows the altered walls, and follows the first clear suggestion that the maze can be understood. The three events become inseparable in the minds of the Gladers. A soft wind crosses the courtyard, carrying the dry scent of grass and the distant sweetness of flowering plants. The warm boards beneath your feet retain the sun from midday, while cooler shadows lie beneath the eaves of the homestead. Beyond the window, a runner crosses the yard with a folded map held close to his chest. His footsteps fade near the eastern passage, where the stone walls stand open beneath a sky of washed blue. Inside Teresa's room, the air feels still enough to preserve every whisper. The lamps remain unlit, because daylight falls gently across the bed and gives the sick room a muted, almost underwater appearance. A glass of water sits untouched beside the blanket, its surface trembling whenever someone closes a door elsewhere. Thomas sits in a chair near the wall, keeping his attention on Teresa, although his thoughts wander through unfamiliar corridors. He sees images that seem partly his and partly hers, and the division between them grows more difficult to maintain. A room filled with white walls appears, followed by a table covered in diagrams and instruments. A man's voice speaks about patterns, variables, and subjects, yet the words dissolve before Thomas can grasp them. Teresa's thought arrives among the fragments, insisting that the maze was coded and its movements contained an answer. Thomas remembers the walls opening at dawn, the routes changing after darkness, and the markings that seemed meaningless until now. He begins to understand that the stone corridors may have been constructed as a language. The Gladers have treated the maze as a place to survive, while Teresa's visions suggest that it was also a message. Her knowledge gives her power, but it also makes her dangerous in the eyes of boys who fear every unknown thing. Gally says the girl may have been sent to destroy the fragile balance of the glade. Albie says the balance was already failing before she arrived. Newt watches Thomas carefully, noticing how often his attention moves towards Teresa whenever someone speaks her name. Minho asks whether Thomas has known her before, and Thomas can give no answer that satisfies either of them. He says that he does not remember her, but the statement sounds incomplete even to himself. The boys hear uncertainty as secrecy, and secrecy has always been enough to create suspicion. The established order begins to feel temporary and deliberately disturbed. A quiet settles over the glade during the evening, though it carries none of the comfort usually brought by sunset. The western wall catches a fading orange glow, while the eastern passages darken long before the rest of the settlement. Smoke from the cooking fires drifts low across the grass, stinging the eyes and carrying traces of beans, bread, and charred wood. Near the homestead, boys speak in subdued voices, their silhouettes passing between the windows and the deepening blue outside. The room where Teresa lies holds a separate atmosphere, warmer than the yard, yet strangely colder in its stillness. A candle burns beside the bed, making a small gold reflection on the glass of water. The medicinal odor has weakened, though it remains faintly present beneath the sense of wool, dust, and polished wood. Thomas hears a soft sound from Teresa and rises before anyone else notices. Her fingers move against the blanket, tracing a shape that resembles one of the maze symbols. Her eyelids flutter, but she does not wake. A thought enters Thomas with sudden clarity, sharper than all the fragments before it. The ending has begun. He feels the message not as a prediction, but as a fact already unfolding around them. The voice carries Teresa's fear, yet beneath that fear lies the certainty of someone who has seen the first page of a disaster. Thomas asks what will happen next. Teresa sends him an image of the maze walls closing in daylight, followed by white fire and a field without grass. He asks whether the Gladers can stop it. No answer comes, only the sensation of a door opening somewhere beyond the limits of his mind. When Teresa finally wakes, the room is dark except for the candle, and a narrow bar of moonlight across the floor. Her eyes open without confusion, as though she has returned from a place she can still see. The boys gathered around the bed draw back, but Thomas moves closer before he can consider the danger. Teresa looks at him, and recognition passes between them with a force that leaves the others silent. Thomas knows her emotionally before he can recognize her historically. He knows the comfort of her presence, the urgency of her thoughts, and the unbearable sense that she has been absent for a long time. Teresa speaks her first words in a low, strained voice, naming Thomas before she names the Glade. Her expression remains distant, as though the room is only one layer over a deeper landscape. She says that the maze is a code, then closes her eyes against another vision. The words disturb the boys, because they sound less like a guess than a remembered instruction. Teresa says the patterns change for a reason, and the pathways have been arranged to conceal their meaning. She cannot explain who created the code, but she knows that Thomas helped make it. Thomas feels the telepathic connection open again, carrying images too rapid for spoken language. He sees himself beside Teresa in a bright room, both of them studying lines drawn across a map of stone. He sees her hand touching the same symbols he once believed were random. The vision ends with a warning that reaches him alone. Do not trust the doors. Teresa's spoken voice says nothing further, but Thomas understands that the message has not come from her waking mind. The Gladers move her fully into the homestead for observation and care, keeping the doors guarded through the night. They bring fresh water, clean cloth, and additional lamps, arranging the room as though careful preparation might restore the old order. No one sleeps easily, because the girl has arrived carrying knowledge from a time none of them can reach. Rain begins after midnight, tapping against the roof with a patient rhythm that fills the pauses between conversation. Water runs from the eaves in thin silver strands, gathering in shallow channels around the foundation. The candle flame bends whenever the door opens, and the smell of wet earth enters before the guard closes it again. Teresa's breathing settles into an even pattern, although her hands occasionally tighten against the blanket. Thomas remains awake beside the bed, listening to the rain and the quiet movement of boys beyond the walls. The faint medicinal odor surrounds him, mingling with damp wool and the clean mineral scent of water. Whenever he closes his eyes, Teresa's memories rise through the shared connection. He sees a corridor lined with glass, a door marked by numbers, and a light that turns every face pale. He hears her thinking about Thomas before the Glade, before the box, before the maze became the only world either of them could name. The experiment's changes become more severe after Teresa appears. The walls stop following the rhythm the Gladers have recorded, and their movements become less predictable. The doors fail to open at the expected hour, while distant sounds echo through the passages after the sun has risen. The runners return with maps that contradict one another, each route appearing to have altered while they were still inside. The sky above the Glade remains bright, but the old sense of safety beneath it has thinned. Teresa tells Thomas that the changes are connected to her arrival, though she does not claim to control them. She says the people who built the maze have moved into another stage of the experiment. Thomas asks whether the Gladers were always meant to survive this long. Teresa answers through the link before her voice can form the words. You were meant to remember. The thought is followed by an image of Thomas standing beside her before a wall of symbols. He understands that the story of his former life contains another subject, another witness, and another person who knows what has been taken away. Teresa reveals that Thomas's missing past is shared with at least one other subject, and that knowledge changes the loneliness of his condition. He has believed his lost identity belonged only to him. Now Teresa stands before him as evidence that memory can be divided, concealed, and returned in fragments. The Gladers remain uncertain whether she is their answer or another part of the trap. The day after her awakening, pale light spreads across the sickroom floor and turns every grain of dust into a drifting point. The homestead smells of boiled linen, damp timber, and the mild medicinal mixture prepared for Teresa's continued care. Outside the door, the boys gather in a hush, listening whenever her voice rises above the creak of the house. Thomas sits beside the window, where a cool draft touches his face and moves the loose hair at his forehead. Teresa rests against folded blankets, her complexion still pale beneath the changing light. Her eyes follow shadows that no one else can see, and sometimes she murmurs the names of places beyond the glade. The words arrive unevenly, but Thomas recognizes their importance even when the others do not. She speaks of doors, patterns, numbers, and a structure designed to test the mind as much as the body. She says the maze is a coded structure, then corrects herself by saying that it is also a question. The answer lies somewhere in the arrangement of walls, although the route towards it remains hidden from everyone. Thomas feels the truth of her statement without knowing how he can feel anything so certain. He remembers his own night in the maze, the terror of darkness, and the impossible knowledge that arrived when the walls shifted. Teresa's arrival immediately after that night no longer seems accidental. The two events form a single movement, carrying the glade towards a future that none of its inhabitants can delay. A wind passes through the open courtyard, lifting scraps of dry leaves into slow circles beside the well. The leaves scrape over the ground with a sound like distant paper, while the gardens remain dark and damp from the previous rain. Clouds move across the sun, making the glade brighten and fade in long, quiet intervals. At the homestead, the boys speak softly enough that their words become part of the house's ordinary creaking. Someone carries a tray along the passage, and porcelain touches wood with a small, careful click. The alarm remains silent now, but its memory seems fixed inside the walls. Every sudden movement near the box causes heads to turn, because the Gladers no longer believe that another arrival is impossible. The note declaring Teresa to be the last person who will arrive offers no comfort. If she is truly the last, then the arrival has not completed the old pattern, but ended it. If she is not the last, the statement becomes another uncertainty placed among many. Thomas returns to the platform at dusk, standing where the lift first opened around Teresa's unconscious body. The cables hang motionless above him, dark against the pale stone. He imagines the box rising again through the earth, carrying another message from the people who have controlled their lives. For the first time, he considers that the lift might not carry a boy or a girl. It might carry a machine, a weapon, or some new alteration intended to force the Gladers into another response. Behind him, the homestead windows glow softly, and Teresa's shadow moves across one of the curtains. The sight draws Thomas back with the same quiet certainty that has guided him since the morning. Teresa remains ambiguous to the Gladers because she holds fragments of knowledge they lack, yet she cannot explain their source. Her memories are damaged, just as theirs are, but the pieces she retains connect to the design of their imprisonment. This makes her seem both vulnerable and powerful. Albie fears that she may remember the people responsible for the Glade. Gally fears that she may have helped them. Newt fears that no one will know which interpretation is true until the damage has already spread. Minho fears the maze itself, because every new clue appears to make its corridors more deliberate. Thomas fears the connection between himself and Teresa, because it feels older than any friendship formed within the Glade. Night settles over the stone walls, leaving the stars visible in narrow spaces above the passages. The air cools rapidly, and moisture gathers on the railings around the box platform. Grass bends beneath the passing wind, releasing the green scent of crushed stems and dark soil. From the homestead comes the low murmur of conversation, followed by the soft closing of a wooden door. Teresa lies awake now, though her gaze remains fixed upon a point beyond the ceiling. Thomas sits beside her beneath the weak lamplight, listening to the thoughts that pass between them. She tells him that she remembers his voice from before the maze, but the memory contains no words. He tells her that he remembers her face without remembering where he saw it. Between them, the telepathic connection opens like a narrow bridge over darkness. Across it come fear, trust, fragments of maps, and the certainty that they have both been watched. Teresa says the maze was built to measure their ability to solve a problem under pressure. Thomas replies that the Gladers were also measured by hunger, loneliness, conflict, and fear of the dark. She agrees, though the agreement arrives as an image of many figures observing from behind glass. He asks why she was sent last. Teresa shows him the box doors opening beneath the alarm, her body lifted through darkness, and the note held against her chest. Then she sends a final image of the maze walls beginning to close even as the sun rises. The beginning of the ending, she thinks, and the phrase remains between them long after the room has fallen quiet. Morning finds the glade changed in ways too subtle to measure, although every boy feels the difference beneath his ordinary movements. The paths between the homestead and the gardens seem narrower, while the empty corners near the walls appear newly watchful. A thin mist rests over the grass, dissolving as the sun climbs above the stone. Water drips from the leaves, and the sound of each drop seems separate within the broad stillness. The box platform remains empty, its metal surface marked by moisture and a few grains of dust. The lift's cables are quiet, yet their weight hangs visibly above the shaft. Inside the homestead, Teresa sits with help from the med shacks, her fingers gripping the edge of the bed. The boys watch from the doorway, maintaining a careful distance that does not prevent their fear from filling the room. Thomas stands nearest, drawn towards her despite his lack of ordinary memories. He recognizes the way she turns her head before he recognizes the words she uses. He knows when the shared connection is about to begin, because the air around him seems to grow dense and sound becomes distant. Teresa tells him that the visions will return more often. She says the maze will reveal itself only when the Gladers stop treating its shape as natural. Thomas hears the sentence aloud, but its deeper meaning enters through thought. The walls are instructions. The doors are part of the question. The patterns contain the root. These messages arrive without sound, and Thomas understands why ordinary conversation cannot carry everything Teresa knows. She possesses fragments rather than a complete memory, but each fragment points towards a truth that the Gladers have avoided. Her presence has not solved the mystery of the Glade. It has shown that the mystery was designed, that Thomas belongs inside its design, and that Teresa belongs there with him. The boys leave the room one by one, carrying their uncertainty back into the settlement. Outside, the eastern passage is open beneath a brightening sky, but the familiar invitation of the maze has disappeared. The Gladers no longer see the stone corridors as a fixed challenge that can be mastered by patience and courage. They see an instrument being adjusted around them. The experiment has changed, the ending has begun, and the established order has become something temporary. Thomas remains beside Teresa while the first sounds of work return to the glade. A hammer strikes wood near the gardens, a bucket scrapes across stone, and distant voices call instructions through the morning air. The alarm is silent, the box is still, and the walls stand open under the pale light. Yet the quiet carries the memory of cables under strain, metal doors parting, and a girl rising from beneath the earth. Teresa's first words continue to echo in Thomas's thoughts. The maze is a code. Her name returns through the shared connection, not as a spoken sound, but as a presence shaped by fear and recognition. Thomas closes his eyes and sees the two of them before the white room, studying a map they cannot yet remember drawing. When he opens them, Teresa is awake, watching the same sunlight move across the floor. Neither of them can explain the bond between them. Neither can restore the past. Still, the connection remains, and through it the lost years no longer belong to Thomas alone. The glade continues around the homestead, but the old pattern has been broken forever. A newcomer has arrived who recognizes almost nothing, and yet she has recognized Thomas. The box has carried Teresa upward, the note has named her the last, and the maze has answered with silence. Beyond the walls, the people conducting the experiment have begun another stage. Within the settlement, every boy feels the approach of a change that cannot be measured by maps. The morning light settles over Teresa's face, pale and still, while the scent of medicine lingers softly in the room. Thomas listens to the quiet inside his mind, where her thoughts move beside his own. The ending waits somewhere beyond the open passages, concealed within stone, numbers, and shifting doors. For now, Teresa breathes, Thomas watches, and the glade holds its uneasy silence beneath the rising sun. The map room becomes the quiet center of the final investigation, with the glade breathing uneasily beyond its narrow windows. You stand beside the long wooden table while Thomas places another runner's map upon the growing arrangement. Around you, paper covers the boards in overlapping squares, each sheet marked with charcoal lines, pencil dust, and cramped handwriting. The room carries the dry scent of old fibers, while faint footsteps pass outside and disappear beneath the murmuring of the waking settlement. Thomas studies the maps with a stillness deeper than concentration, tracing passages that have shifted from one day to the next. Teresa sits opposite him, pale beneath the weak morning light, her fingers resting near a row of folded pages. Minho brings the maps gathered by the runners, while Newt preserves the order in which they were drawn. Together, the maps record the changing shape of the maze across many days, preserving openings, closures, turns, and movements that once appeared purposeless. The arrangement seems disordered at first, because each map describes a separate morning, afternoon, or evening within the stone labyrinth. Thomas and Teresa align the sections until one wall meets another, and the apparent randomness begins to resolve into language. The gladers lean over the table without speaking, watching repeated arrangements emerge beneath the rubbed charcoal. The maze has not been wandering without meaning, and the maps have not merely preserved meaningless movement. They reveal returning patterns and measured changes that belong to a hidden design. You remain close to the table as the pages shift beneath careful hands, and the quiet room fills with the soft sound of paper sliding over wood. Charcoal flecks gather beside Thomas's wrist, while pencil dust settles into the shallow grain of the table. A narrow shaft of daylight touches one corner of the maps, turning the white paper silver and leaving the rest in muted shadow. The air is cool near the doorway, though the room has gathered the warmth of several bodies standing close together. Beyond the walls, the glade wakes with subdued movements, and distant voices rise and fade like sounds heard through sleep. A small breeze enters through a gap in the stone, carrying the scent of grass and damp earth. The marks on the pages look delicate beside the heavy walls surrounding the settlement. You hear a faint scrape whenever Minho shifts his weight, followed by the gentle creak of the table beneath the maps. The maze waits beyond the doors, silent for the moment, though its silence feels like a held breath. Thomas places the final section beside Teresa's hand, and the letters of the hidden code become visible across the assembled maps. The maze sections correspond to a sequence of letters, and the sequence forms words that have been waiting inside the changing stone. Float appears first, followed by catch, bleed, death, stiff, and push. The words seem simple, almost childish, yet their order carries the weight of instructions. Thomas repeats the sequence quietly while Teresa follows the lines connecting the sections. Minho recognizes familiar landmarks within the pattern, and Newt marks the route with a fresh stroke of charcoal. The completed pattern provides instructions for reaching an exit, though the route does not lead towards any place that feels safe. Instead, the path turns towards the area associated with the grievers. where the maze has always seemed darkest and most deliberate. Thomas and the other gladers use the code to identify a route through the maze. The route requires more than speed, because the sections must be entered in sequence and the instructions followed together. You watch Newt gather the pages into bundles, while Thomas keeps the most important map open beneath his palm. The word push remains near the center, surrounded by lines resembling a wound spreading through stone. Bleed seems less like a warning than a description of what the passage will demand. The chamber grows warmer as the gladers draw near, and the table gives a faint tremor beneath their hands. Light rests along the paper's creases, revealing fingerprints, smudged corners, and the blurred edges of hurried drawings. A pencil rolls slowly across the boards before stopping against a folded map. The scent of charcoal mingles with sweat, damp cloth, and the faint metallic trace that enters whenever the maze opens. Outside, wind travels through the corridors and returns in low currents beneath the doors. The stone seems to vibrate far away, though no creature has yet crossed into view. You feel the floor beneath your feet as a solid thing, and then as something that may soon become uncertain. The gladers prepare for an escape that is also a deliberate confrontation with the grievers. Thomas understands that the route cannot be attempted by one runner alone, because every turning depends upon the movement of the group. Minho accepts the burden of leading, while Newt organizes the others into smaller lines that can remain connected. Teresa keeps the code close, and Thomas carries the map whose marks now resemble instructions rather than a record of fear. No one pretends that the passage will be gentle. The old protections of the glade have already begun to fail, and the grievers have entered the place that once seemed safe. Their arrival changes every plan, because the walls can no longer hold danger at a distance. The escape must begin before the settlement is completely surrounded, yet waiting would leave the injured and frightened behind. Thomas sees the same decision in the faces around him, where exhaustion has been replaced by a quiet willingness to move. You stand among the gladers as they gather weapons, torches, rope, and whatever small objects can be carried without slowing the group. The air beyond the doors has sharpened, and every breath tastes faintly of dust raised from distant corridors. Artificial darkness lies in the maze even beneath daylight, with only narrow openings allowing the sky to enter. The stone passages hold the night's cold, and moisture glistens in shallow grooves along the walls. Somewhere beyond the nearest turn, a creature drags its weight across the ground. The sound begins as a low scrape, pauses, and then returns with a deeper grinding rhythm. Wind moves through the open passages, lifting loose paper from a nearby bench and pressing it against the doorway. The glade behind you feels smaller with every sound, while the maze ahead widens into an endless series of choices. Thomas and the other gladers enter the first section together, following the marks preserved across the maps. The route begins with an ordinary turn, then bends towards a wall whose position has changed since the previous day. Minho signals for the group to wait, and Teresa identifies the next opening from the sequence of letters. They move again when the passage aligns with the pattern, keeping close enough for each person to hear the breathing of the next. Float guides them towards a lowered section, where the ground slopes beneath a ceiling marked by pale scratches. Catch directs their attention to a narrow crossing, where a fallen beam hangs above a dark gap. Bleed appears beside a route through broken stone, becoming a silent instruction for the cost of passage. The gladers pass through one by one, gripping shoulders and sleeves whenever the floor shifts beneath them. The maze offers no clear sign that they are nearing an exit, but the repeated structure assures Thomas that the route remains true. You move with the others through corridors that bend like folded ribbons, each wall enclosing a slightly different darkness. The surfaces are rough beneath your fingers, powdered with pale grit that clings to the skin. A cool current brushes your face whenever a passage opens, bringing the smell of wet stone and distant vegetation. In a lower corridor, water gathers in a shallow channel and trembles whenever something heavy moves nearby. Torchlight passes over old scratches, broken marks, and traces left by runners who never returned. Behind you, footsteps merge into one soft, uneven rhythm, while ahead the darkness receives every beam without reflection. A cloud passes over the unseen sky, and the artificial gloom within the maze deepens. You hear metal joints turning somewhere beyond the wall, followed by a slow, insect-like clicking. The noise fades, but its memory remains in the narrow air. The route carries the Gladers towards the final section of the trial, where the passages gather around the area associated with the grievers. Death appears in the pattern, and no one needs the word explained. Stiff follows it, written across a section whose corridors form a rigid, unnatural arrangement. Push completes the instruction, pointing towards a boundary that has never before been crossed in this manner. Thomas recognizes the design as an invitation and a trap at the same time. The pattern has revealed an exit, but reaching it requires the Gladers to force their way past the creatures guarding its approach. Minho gives the order to advance, and the group moves as one body into the final section. The first griever emerges from a side passage with wet metal limbs and a body that seems assembled from pain. Thomas watches it turn towards them, its mechanisms tightening before the attack. The Gladers fight through the final section, using spears, stones, torches, and the strength of many bodies together. You feel the ground shudder beneath each approaching creature, as though the maze itself is struggling to contain the violence. Cold air pours through the corridors whenever a door opens, carrying dust into the light. Metal claws strike the walls and scatter small fragments across the floor. The stone underfoot becomes slick in places, and the smell of oil grows stronger near the grievers' chambers. Torches burn unevenly in the moving air, their flames narrowing whenever the creatures draw close. Voices break into short commands, then vanish beneath the grinding machinery. A sharp wind enters from above, twisting through the passage and lifting strands of hair against your face. The darkness flashes with brief reflections from metal surfaces, each glimmer disappearing before it can be understood. The corridor seems to breathe around you, expanding with echoes and contracting beneath heavy impacts. Several Gladers die during the escape, and their absence changes the movement of everyone who remains. A body is carried only as far as the group can manage before the route demands that the living continue. Thomas cannot separate grief from the need to move, because the opening behind him narrows with every passing moment. Teresa reaches for his hand when the path divides, and together they choose the passage indicated by the final arrangement. Newt keeps the remaining Gladers together, calling names whenever fear begins to scatter them. Minho turns back more than once, defending the slower members while the walls close around the group. The old protections have failed completely, and the glade lies exposed to the grievers. Nothing behind you offers shelter, while nothing ahead promises certainty. Thomas sees the exit as a black shape in the stone, surrounded by machinery and marked by the last instruction. The word push becomes action, and the Gladers press against the barrier until it yields. You step through the opening into a place where the air feels too clean to belong beneath the earth. The sudden brightness makes every surface appear pale, smooth, and almost without age. Behind you, the maze continues to groan, and the sound reaches the new chamber as a distant vibration. Dust hangs in your clothing, while the floor beneath you carries no grit, moisture, or uneven stone. White light spreads from hidden panels above, without flame or visible source. The walls are clean enough to reflect the figures gathered before them, though the reflections appear faint and colorless. A cool current moves along the floor, carrying the sterile scent of metal and treated air. Somewhere beyond the chamber, doors open with a soft mechanical sigh. The glade's grass, timber, and weathered stone already seem impossibly far away. You hear the survivors breathing, each breath distinct within the polished silence. The people who appear to rescue the survivors wear clean clothing and speak with measured sympathy. They say the maze has been left behind, then lead the exhausted gladers through corridors of artificial light. Thomas recognizes that their arrival is too organized to be accidental. The rescuers know where the survivors will stand, which injuries require attention, and how long the passage has taken. This confirms what Thomas has begun to understand. The gladers have been observed throughout their confinement. Cameras, unseen watchers, and distant voices have occupied the maze even when the glade seemed abandoned. The name Wicked is associated with the organization behind the maze, though its meaning remains hidden beneath official language. Thomas hears the name in the clean facility and remembers it as a sign of something larger than the stone walls. The survivors leave the glade believing they have escaped, but their first relief already carries another uncertainty. You pass beneath bright panels that cast no shadows, while smooth doors close quietly behind the group. The facility smells of disinfectant, warm plastic, and freshly cleaned surfaces. Thin glass divides one corridor from another, showing empty rooms filled with chairs, instruments, and folded blankets. A ventilation system murmurs above you, steady and almost soothing after the grinding sounds of the maze. Your clothes remain rough with dust, and the clean floor makes every step feel strangely loud. Light gleams along metal rails and pale counters, leaving no corner dark enough to hide a mark. A distant alarm sounds once, then stops before its purpose becomes clear. Beyond the windows, there is no visible sky, only another illuminated corridor leading into the white distance. The polished surfaces offer a calmness that feels manufactured rather than kind. You can still imagine the wind moving through the maze, though the air here remains perfectly still. The explanation that follows replaces the maze mystery with a larger one, because the escape itself was part of the design. Thomas learns that the trial measured more than endurance, speed, or the ability to solve a changing passage. The creators watched how the gladers formed loyalties, responded to loss, and chose between one life and many. Every map, death, and decision became part of a record kept beyond their sight. Teresa understands enough to recognize that their suffering was arranged, while Thomas senses that the arrangement has not ended. The rescuers are connected to the same wider experiment, even though they present themselves as saviors. Their language suggests that the glade was one stage in a continuing test, rather than a sealed world with a single purpose. Thomas sees Gally at the conclusion of the maze trial, appearing among the people who should have remained behind. Gally has been influenced or altered by the creators, and his presence makes the rescue feel carefully arranged. The survivors are moved onwards, carrying the belief that they have escaped, and the knowledge that escape may have been expected. In the facility beyond the glade, the light remains clear and unwavering across the empty surfaces. A faint reflection follows you along the glass, joining the pale shapes of the other survivors. The corridor bends without revealing its destination, and each turn removes another view of the room behind. Air flows from narrow vents at the same temperature everywhere, neither warm nor cold enough to comfort. The smooth floor reflects shoes, shadows, and the slight tremor of hands held close to the body. Somewhere nearby, paper is being sorted, and the sound suggests that records are still being arranged. The scent of medicine lingers beneath the sharper odor of cleaning fluid. No wind enters this place, yet the memory of moving air remains within your clothing. A door closes with a quiet seal, and the world beyond it becomes only a softened vibration. The facility seems endless because its surfaces repeat without age, weather, or visible change. The survivors do not yet know that their confinement will continue beyond this first escape. In 2010, The scorched trials follows the events of the maze, carrying Thomas and the others into a harsher stage. In 2011, the death cure continues the sequence, widening the experiment and deepening the question of what Wicked intends. The maze, therefore, becomes an opening movement, not a complete explanation. Its shifting walls teach Thomas that a pattern can remain hidden even while it is plainly visible. Its maps preserve the days, and its code preserves the intention behind them. Float, catch, bleed, death, stiff, and push remain as fragments of language drawn across the stone. The words have guided the Gladers through danger, but they have not guided them beyond observation. You move with the survivors through another passage, where the clean walls hold the soft echo of measured footsteps. The light above remains artificial, steady, and pale, without the gradual warmth of morning. Smooth surfaces replace rough stone, and the scent of grass disappears beneath antiseptic air. Your skin remembers the dust of the maze, while the facility offers water, cloth, and quiet rooms. A ventilation grill hums in the ceiling, creating a low, continuous tone beneath the voices. Behind a glass panel, a stack of paper waits beside a dark instrument whose purpose cannot be seen. The corridor's corners are perfectly clean, with no loose fibers, fallen leaves, or traces of weather. You feel the absence of wind as a kind of pressure, surrounding the body without touching it. The brightness settles over the survivors like another enclosure. The 2014 film adaptation changes several details of the novel's plot and setting, reshaping the maze and the circumstances surrounding the escape. The broad movement remains recognizable, yet the screen version presents its own arrangement of danger, place, and explanation. The novel's map, room, code, grievers, and facility belong to a particular sequence of discovery. The film alters details while preserving the central feeling that the apparent prison is part of a larger design. For Thomas, the essential knowledge arrives before any complete answer can be offered. He has seen the pattern hidden in the maze, and he has seen the watchers behind it. He knows that Wicked has made the walls, the trial, and the conditions of survival. The people who claim to have rescued the Gladers carry the same connection into the open world. Nothing about the escape can be separated from the experiment that made escape necessary. You remain beside the survivors as the facility draws them deeper into its clean interior. The polished walls take the light and return it without warmth. Soft blankets lie folded on narrow beds, each corner aligned with deliberate precision. Water runs somewhere behind a partition, and the sound is smooth, regular, and distant. A faint smell of soap rises from freshly washed cloth. The air moves gently through the room without changing temperature, carrying no trace of soil or rain. Outside the sealed windows, hidden machinery gives a slow pulse beneath the floor. The survivors' footsteps soften against the clean surface, while the maze survives only in memory and dust. One small mark remains on Thomas's hand, darkened by charcoal from the map room. He turns it beneath the artificial light, seeing in that smear the table, the code, and the route. The danger has passed from immediate reach, yet its meaning remains open. The Glade has been left behind, but the larger test has not reached its conclusion. The final mystery is no longer how the maze changes, because the maps have answered that question. The deeper mystery concerns the people who designed those changes and the purpose they found in watching the results. Thomas recognizes that the Gladers were never alone, even during the quietest nights beneath the stone. Their confinement was measured, their choices recorded, and their escape anticipated. The survivors stand beyond the exit, but the boundary between prison and experiment has become impossible to see. Galley's altered presence confirms that the creators can reach into the Gladers' lives even after the trial appears finished. Wicked remains a name, an organization, and a shadow stretching beyond the clean facility. You lie among the survivors in the quiet room, where the artificial light has softened behind closed panels. The blanket beneath you is smooth and evenly woven, without the coarse texture of Glade clothing. A machine breathes quietly near the wall, rising and falling with a rhythm gentler than the griever's. The scent of medicine remains faintly present, mixed with warm linen and the clean mineral smell of water. Beyond the door, footsteps pass at measured intervals, never hurried and never uncertain. The walls contain no scratches, dampness, or changing openings. A narrow strip of light rests beneath the door, holding its shape while the room grows still. You remember the wind in the maze, the charcoal on the maps, and the stone vibrating beneath approaching creatures. Those memories move slowly through the mind, losing their sharp edges without losing their meaning. The night beyond the facility cannot be seen, yet somewhere beyond the walls, darkness continues to gather. The survivors believe they have escaped, and for a time that belief is permitted to remain. Thomas carries the completed pattern with him, even though the paper has been taken away. He remembers that the maze sections corresponded to letters, and that the letters became instructions. He remembers float, catch, bleed, death, stiff, and push. He remembers Teresa, Minho, and Newt bent over the maps, aligning the days until language appeared. He remembers the route towards the grievers, the failed boundary, and the gladers moving together through the final section. He remembers those who died, understanding that their absence also became part of the record. The survivors have crossed the exit, yet the design continues beyond the doors. The pattern hidden in the maze was only the first pattern, and the clean facility contains others. You remain in the quiet artificial light, while distant machinery keeps its patient rhythm. The paper maps are gone, but their folded shapes seem to rest somewhere beneath the silence. Charcoal dust clings to memory like a soft grey veil, and cramped handwriting moves behind closed eyes. Far away, stone corridors may still be vibrating beneath approaching creatures in another chamber. Wind may still be traveling through opened passages, carrying the cold smell of rain and earth. Here, the surfaces remain clean, the doors sealed, and the lights pale above you. The glade has become a place of grass, timber, fear, and mourning remembered from a distance. The maze has become a pattern, a trial, and a doorway into another uncertainty. The survivors rest beyond it, believing that the walls have opened for the last time. Yet Wicked remains beyond the visible rooms, and the experiment continues beyond the first escape. The facility grows quiet around you, while the memory of the maze settles into the darkness. Thomas's recognition remains calm and unavoidable. The watchers were present, the route was designed, and the ending was another beginning. The survivors have left the glade, but the test has not released them. Their journey continues through the Scorch trials in 2010 and the Death Cure in 2011, where the pattern expands beyond the maze. The 2014 film adaptation offers another version of those events, changing details of plot and setting while keeping the larger unease. For now, the maps lie still in memory, and the names remain clear enough to guide the sleeping mind. Thomas, Teresa, Minho, and Newt remain beside the table, surrounded by paper, dust, and the language hidden inside stone. The maze closes behind them, though its design continues in rooms filled with artificial light and clean surfaces. You drift through that silence as the final passage becomes distant and the pattern slowly folds itself away.